Chapter 806. She had also said that she would never beg him again. But when Pei Chichi set foot on this piece of land again, she was afraid that she couldn't sleep day and night. Pei Chichi would come back and take everything away from her. Tang Yu looked at her and didn't say anything. He wasn't so naive to think that she could turn back and let him go. If she could, she wouldn't have been so crazy to hurt Shen Zhongshan. He didn't soften up for her. He opened the door and went straight out, as if he didn't hear her crying behind him. He and Shen Lian formed a dead end, and neither of them would take the initiative to break this strange balance. He was waiting, and Shen Lian was delaying. If she couldn't get what she wanted, he couldn't get what he wanted either. Tang Yu lit a cigarette at the door and slowly walked out. When he returned to Yang Hui, Lin Yun and Tang Jiyuan were both sitting and waiting for him. The two babies were still sleeping. Tang Yu went upstairs to check on Xiaoshen first. When he came down, Lin Yun asked first, "How is it?" Tang Yu walked to the sofa and sat down. His body slightly sank into the soft sofa and he rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Nothing. Lin Yun was a little anxious. You can't let Xiaoshen stay here forever. She was the grandmother. If this got out, people would laugh their teeth off. Tang Yu looked at his mother. His lips moved, but in the end, he didn't say anything. On this matter, it was rare for him to show weakness. He couldn't predict what Chichi would think after knowing the truth. Would she hate him even more? Seeing that he didn't say anything, Lin Yun didn't say anything. In fact, they knew Tang Yu very well. How could they not guess that Tang Yu had something on his mind? Lin Yun hesitated and said, "Tang Yu, we're old enough to see and experience things. We really don't lack anything, so you don't have to worry about anything because of us." Tang Yu wiped his face with his hand, and his body leaned back. He didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, he stood up and smiled. "Mom, Chichi's condition hasn't completely passed the observation period. The incubation period for this disease was 3 years. After 3 years, there wouldn't be any problems. In other words, he could not completely fall out with Shen Lian for the next 3 years. On the day of the engagement, he had done something to Shen Lian's car. At that time, he did not know about it. Later on, when he found out, he could no longer do anything to the bone marrow source. Even if the chances of a successful bone marrow transplant after a relapse were very small, he would rather keep Shen Lian. No one knows a son better than his mother. Tang Yu only said half a sentence, but Lin Yun understood. She was stunned. Then, she let out a long sigh. Tang Yu, this child, why did he have to do this? He had thrown his life away, all for the sake of that unpredictable future. But have you ever thought that 3 years is enough to change a lot of things? Lin Yun sighed softly. Jinrong begged Old Master to fulfill his wish. Although he hit her a few times, Old Master relented. One must know that Pei Chichi and Jinrong were originally a couple. In the past, Jinrong had sacrificed so much for Pei Chichi. Even if they were together now, no one in the world would object. Tang Yu's expression was blank for a moment. He lowered his eyes. "I won't let her be with anyone else." Lin Yun looked at her outstanding son. No matter how she looked at him, he seemed like the silly son of a landlord. She didn't say anything more. When the babies woke up, she fed them and took them away. Chapter 807. She said worriedly, then Jinrong, she had her concerns. After all, Jinrong was also her nephew. It would be a lie to say that she didn't love him. Tang Yu's voice was a little hurried and bitter. Chichi won't fall in love with anyone else. She had loved him deeply. How could she easily accept someone else? Lin Yun nodded and asked the servants to take the 2 babies back to Zhao Yi. Then, she turned back. There were some things that she couldn't say even in front of Tang Jiyuan. Now that it was only the mother and son, she still said, "Tang Yu, you have to be careful. Shen Lian is now," she didn't need to say the rest, but Tang Yu already knew. He smiled faintly to show that he understood. Lin Yun went back after giving the instructions. Tang Yu turned around and got into the car, driving all the way back to the rose garden. Although he was very hungry, he was not in the mood to eat. Under the little maid's uneasy gaze, he slowly walked upstairs. Upstairs, he didn't allow servants to come up for more than a year. Everything was taken care of by himself. In the bedroom, it was still the same as when Pei Chichi was there. Their wedding photos were hanging on the wall. Tang Yu sat in the living room, his body deeply sunk into the sofa. Today, he had experienced ecstasy, passion, anger, and helplessness. A small, square robot slid over. It looked ugly and cute. It had a leather appearance, a round face, shoulder-length hair, a small body, and 4 thin legs, but it was very flexible. The little robot slid over and could even plunge into Tang Yu's arms and call him daddy. Tang Yu's fingers gently stroked the black hair. No one knew that it was Pei Chichi's hair. He cut it with his own hands during the month when she was in a coma. Touching it now was like touching her. Tang Yu's mood improved a little. He lowered his head and picked up the little person, putting it beside him. Xiao Qi, you're still the most obedient. Not like your mother. She's so stubborn and often makes my liver hurt. The robot named Little Seven nodded, its round eyes blinking a few times, indicating that it understood. Her program was very simple. Whenever she saw him, she would be easy to get along with. Tang Yu didn't ask anyone to set up her other functions. It was just a simple conversation, as long as she could accompany him. However, this kind of emotional communication was precisely what the highest-end robots possessed, and the number 7S on the market did not have such high-level emotions. 7 leaned on Tang Yu's side obediently. Then, she rested her head on his leg. Tang Yu lowered his head to look at her and smiled. Pei Chichi has a rival in love. He patted her again. Go play by yourself. 7 wasn't willing and was still on his leg. Tang Yu had no choice but to hug her. So clingy, just like your mother. Little Chichi's little hands and feet were wrapped around him. Tang Yu couldn't help but laugh, but he was a little distracted. He thought about what he did to Pei Chichi in the car today. If she hadn't woken up, he would really be worse than a beast today. But he didn't care that much. If he was worse than a beast, then so be it. Downstairs, the little maids gathered together, a little worried. Sir is alone with that robot again. If this goes on for a long time, will there be mental problems? Another one whispered, I think there's already problems now. That's right. Which man of his age doesn't have a woman? Being with a robot like this, will something indescribable happen between them? Chapter 808. Beauty magazine was selling like hotcakes once again, and it was printed 3 more times. The boss of the magazine company counted the money until his hands were sore, and the editor-in-chief was also very proud. Man magazine had always been known as the industry leader, but this time, Beauty magazine simply beat that bullshit magazine that specialized in taking off women's clothes. The editor-in-chief was very happy just thinking about it, so he found Pei Chichi particularly pleasing to the eye and spoke gently. Little Pei, I've already applied for a raise for you and skipped 2 grades. This is a rare thing in our company, so keep up the good work. After saying that, the editor-in-chief changed the topic. This time, I have a special reward for you and old Khan. Pei Chichi looked at him eagerly, as if all she could see was the scene of RMB sprinkling down. The editor-in-chief smiled mysteriously. It's a good thing that only happens once in 1,000 years. He took out 2 invitations from the drawer and pushed them in front of Pei Chichi and old Khan Celebrity Charity Night. It's pretty cool, isn't it? It's organized by Madame Su Mo. There are only 2 in the company, so I think it's better to let the meritorious people go. Old Khan took it, looked at the publicity on the back, and grinned. Editor-in-chief, don't tell me that you want us to secretly take photos and write a press release or something. The editor-in-chief's scheme had succeeded, and he smiled contentedly. Old Khan, you really know me. Old Khan really wanted to say, fuck, I don't want to go. He knew that this old guy was obviously playing dirty. The editor-in-chief looked at Pei Chichi with a smile and stretched out a finger. 10,000 yuan for the installation fee. That's enough capital, right? Dress up well and get a headline. Old Khan puffed out a smoke ring and said in a gruff voice, we're making a magazine, and it's printed on paper. What headline? Even if we get the headline, the whole world will know about it when it's printed in about a month. The editor-in-chief could become the editor-in-chief not only because he had foresight, but also because he was shameless and thick-skinned. He was still smiling. Because this issue of the magazine is selling very well, I've specially asked someone to open a Weibo account. Pei Chichi and Old Khan looked at each other, and they had a bad feeling in their hearts. Sure enough, the editor-in-chief said, we'll focus on topics related to Mr. Tang. I guarantee it'll be exclusive. Old Khan spoke first, we're not paparazzi. What do you mean by paparazzi or kitten? It's all photography. Why do you have to make such a clear distinction? The chief editor got up and patted Laro Khan on the shoulder earnestly. The higher-ups attach great importance to this project. We can develop in this direction in the future. This is an act of infringement, Old Khan reminded. He did not believe that the chief editor did not know. Naturally, the chief editor had already thought of this. He smiled sweetly and said, how would these big shots have the time to argue with us about this kind of lawsuit? Don't forget that Sheng Yuan has a team of lawyers, Pei Chichi said softly. The editor-in-chief blew his beard and glared at them. In any case, I'll take care of it after this happens. You guys just focus on gathering the information that the fans want. Laro Khan and Pei Chichi looked at each other and said nothing. After returning to Old Khan's office, Pei Chichi put down the things in her hands and looked at Old Khan with her hands on her hips. What do you say? Old Khan was taking a cigarette. After taking it, he put out the old cigarette butt and replied casually, what do you mean? Are you really going to be a paparazzi? Pei Chichi glared at him. Chapter 809. Pei Chichi's gaze fell on the invitation card on the table. What about this? Go. Why not? Old Khan flashed his pearly white teeth. Why? Are you still scared? Pei Chichi said softly, I'm not scared. Old Khan put his arm around her shoulder. You still have me, don't you? On Saturday night, at the GM Hotel in City B, the celebrity charity night was about to be held. There was a long red carpet in front of the hotel, and on both sides, there were people taking pictures of the celebrities. The host, who was also one of the top celebrities in the country, was explaining the guests at the signing wall on the red carpet. His partner was a newcomer. She was beautiful and pure, and looked like she would become popular soon. As Pei Chichi and Old Khan walked on the red carpet, the host recognized Old Khan and said warmly, let's welcome Old Khan from Joren magazine and his little girlfriend. Actually, he had not seen it clearly for a moment, but now that he saw it clearly, it turned out to be Pei Chichi. How should he put it? Pei Chichi was Tang Yu's ex-wife. Regardless of whether there was anything going on between her and Old Khan, it should not be said out in the open. Moreover, Mr. Tang was also walking on the red carpet with his fiancée, Shen Lian, beside him. The host had made a slip of the tongue, but Old Khan only smiled and did not correct him. Of course, Tang Yu also heard it. His originally expressionless face became even colder. Shen Lian, who was beside him, smiled and said, this doesn't feel good, does it? She was in a good mood today, seeing such a big show the moment she arrived. Moreover, it had been a long time since she saw Pei Chichi. It must have been tough on Shen Lian. She could actually walk like a normal person with a prosthetic leg and a pair of high heels. She held Tang Yu's arm and walked towards Pei Chichi with a victorious smile on her face. She wanted to see Pei Chichi's expression of wanting to cry. She wanted to tell Pei Chichi that Tang Yu was now hers. However, she was still thinking too much. When he reached the end of the red carpet, Tang Yu did not stop. Instead, he walked straight to the banquet hall. Shen Lian stood there alone. Her delicate face that was raised high had some cracks. She just signed her name, smiled, and let the reporters take a few photos. She didn't even look at Pei Chichi. This reminded Pei Chichi of the first time she met Shen Lian. She looked at her as if she was looking at a lowly creature. Pei Chichi looked down and smiled. As long as Shen Lian was happy. There's no problem, right? Laro Khan looked at Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi shook her head and entered the banquet hall with Laro Khan. Laro Khan carefully helped her carry the silver gown. It was a wraparound design. He really couldn't tell that this girl was actually quite stylish in this dress. Needless to say, she was pretty. Pei Chichi had always been a little fairy. She was so much better than that white lotus from earlier. It was quite lively tonight. Laro Khan and Pei Chichi were just about to enter when another pair of enemies appeared. Qin Anlan and the recently popular Pei Huan. Qin Anlan's gaze was indifferent, and Pei Huan looked innocent. Of course, Pei Chichi remembered the scene 2 years ago when they were working in the office. However, she wouldn't tell Laro Khan about this. Qin Anlan walked closer and slowed down his pace. After a long time, he finally approached and looked at Pei Chichi. "You're finally willing to come back." Laro Khan listened at the side. This wasn't right. Why did it sound a little ambiguous? He looked at Pei Chichi and then at Qin Anlan's passionate eyes. He was sure that this man was also one of Pei Chichi's men, who had his disciple offended in the past. CEO of Shengyuan, CEO of Lin Corporation, CEO of King Entertainment. All of them were not to be trifled with. Chapter 8:10. Tell me, how many other affairs do you have that you haven't told us? Old Khan lowered his voice and asked excitedly. Pei Chichi also said softly, "Just this one." She then smiled at Qin Anlan. "President Qin, long time no see." Qin Anlan did not give her face and continued to look at her coldly. His gaze was cold, but as a man, Old Khan could tell that he was restraining himself. This man seemed to love his beloved disciple very much. There might be a good show to watch later. Qin Anlan was as cold as ice, but Pei Huan surreptitiously extended her little paw, expressing her goodwill towards Pei Chichi. Pei Huan seemed to have forgotten about last time's unhappiness. Pei Chichi found it hard to understand. Pei Huan used to be so mean, so how did she suddenly become so sweet and innocent? Or did she not get a role in some drama? She did not pay much attention to Pei Huan. Otherwise, she would definitely stick to her like a piece of candy, and she would not be able to get rid of her. Pei Huan was a little disappointed, but since there were reporters taking photos, she still put on a sweet smile and put on her most attractive pose. Qin Anlan was in the entertainment industry, so he knew Old Khan. He looked at her and said, "Pei Chichi, your taste has really improved." Pei Chichi held Old Khan's arm and smiled. "I don't have a good appetite like President Qin. Everything tastes good." Qin Anlan looked at her and went in with the naive girl. Pei Chichi shrugged at Old Khan and said, "See? What peach blossom? You're my enemy." Qin Anlan might be interested in her, but she did not dare to think that she was important to Qin Anlan. She was only interested in him because she was with Tang Yu at that time. After entering, Laro Khan and Su Mo got to know each other. They even hugged each other. Pei Chichi watched from the side, silently looking up at the 45-degree chandelier above. After exchanging greetings with Old Khan, Su Mo sized up Pei Chichi and chuckled, "Old Khan, you've had many women around you over the years. She's the biggest symbol." That being said, Su Mo knew Pei Chichi. What a joke, Tang Yu's ex-wife, who didn't know her in this circle. Now, he was with Old Khan. Was Old Khan tired of living? Didn't you see Tang Yu's cold gaze? And President Qin, oh, by the way, the naive girl next to President Qin seemed to like chatting and kept looking in their direction. Su Mo was a very smart woman. She was not even 40 years old, but she still had her charm. She was very popular in this circle, and she was also very sophisticated. She could see through everything with just a glance. Laro Khan glanced at his beloved disciple and said, "My disciple. Don't forget her if you can help her in the future." Su Mo and Pei Chichi chatted for a while. She was an easygoing person, but her affectionate eyes would occasionally drift to Old Khan. She even whispered a few words to him before leaving. Pei Chichi looked at Old Khan and said, "Did she sleep with you too?" Old Khan touched his nose. He did not admit or deny it. Pei Chichi asked casually. She did not expect to get to the point. She looked at Old Khan and was really impressed by him. It was many years ago. She and I were young back then, and we just played together. Old Khan said uncomfortably, "Back then, everyone was in a difficult situation. There was a lot of pressure." He then glared at Pei Chichi and said, "Why are you asking this, you little brat?" Chapter 8:11. Since it was a charity night, there would naturally be an auction. Pei Chichi and Old Khan were just there to watch. The rules tonight were a little perverted. They couldn't participate in the auction of the items they donated. If they wanted to get it back, they would have to rely on their male and female partners to raise their placards. Because of this game, the crowd was very lively. It was a game that rich people liked to play. Pei Chichi stood beside Old Khan and turned her head. "Master, she's the most capable one among all your women." She was referring to Su Mo. It was obvious that Su Mo was very popular. Old Khan chuckled and said something meaningful. "She's quite capable. She's popular with both young and old." There was a lot of information in his words. She didn't say anything else as she looked at the stage. Su Mo, the fashion legend. Pei Chichi guessed that the woman who hurt Old Khan was Sumo. Sumo stood on the stage, radiant. She looked at Old Khan again. There was an unfathomable depth in his eyes. Pei Chichi couldn't help but touch his arm, trying to coax him. "It's okay, master. You still have me." Old Khan's heart warmed. He was actually touched, but he didn't seem to mind. "What's the use of having you?" Pei Chichi pouted and turned her face away to ignore him, expressing her anger. Their interaction was very sweet in the eyes of outsiders. From afar, Shen Lian raised her cup and looked over there before looking at Tang Yu. She smiled faintly and said, "You must feel bad, right?" Tang Yu had always ignored her strange and provocative words. Shen Lian was snubbed. Then, she remembered something important. "Help me bid for the items that I'm donating later." Tang Yu naturally would. He would give her face on the surface. Even if it was in front of Chichi, he didn't know if she would be unhappy or jealous. Shen Lian was very scheming. She had donated a diamond ring. If Tang Yu were to fight for it, everyone would think that it was a marriage proposal in disguise. Tang Yu was also stunned when he saw the diamond ring. The 60-carat perfect diamond ring shone especially brightly on the stage. Shen Lian's desire to get married was clear as day. Su Mo was also on the stage. As a woman, she was a little envious when she saw the shiny diamond ring. This diamond ring was worth at least 10 million. It wasn't something that ordinary people could afford. The male host was used to big scenes, so he performed steadily. "This is a diamond ring donated by President Shen. President Shen is very generous." Then, the live aperture captured Tang Yu, and the host said excitedly, "We look forward to seeing Mr. Tang." Shen Lian, on the other hand, was extremely shy. Everything was under her control. On such an occasion, there was no way Tang Yu wouldn't give her face. When he put on the diamond ring for her, she would let the mainstream media publish all kinds of articles. She didn't believe that Tang Yu could withstand the pressure. The auction began. Silence filled the auction hall. Because Mr. Shen was about to get married. If he were to shoot it, wouldn't he be fighting with Tang Yu for his wife? Tang Yu felt that he had no choice but to go. He smiled faintly, walked onto the stage, and directly bid for the diamond ring worth 53 million yuan. Shen Lian cried tears of joy. She had finally gotten what she had dreamed of. She wanted Tang Yu to announce their marriage in front of Pei Chichi. Even if he didn't love her, so what? Tang Yu was hers, and no one could take him away from her. Just as she was about to go up the stage, Tang Yu made a gesture, indicating that he had something to say. Chapter 8:12. I think President Shen is reminding me that I owe her a ring. Tang Yu's voice was magnetic and touching. All the women present put their palms together and were excited by the beautiful scene. Of course, Pei Chichi was the exception. She watched indifferently as Shen Lian put on a show. She had been waiting for this day for a long time. At that moment, Tang Yu's gaze swept across the audience and paused on Pei Chichi for 2 seconds. His gaze was firm and gentle, just like how he used to look at her in the past. Pei Chichi's gaze was clear and cold, but he quickly shifted his gaze away. Tang Yu held the microphone and said in a clear voice, "Unfortunately, an accident happened when President Shen and I were engaged. So, this ring can be considered a diamond ring to make up for that day." Shen Lian was stunned. She did not expect Tang Yu to say that. It sounded dignified, but that was not the case. Which woman would want to be engaged when she was almost 30? When the camera pointed at her, she forced a smile and stood up. I'm very happy that Mr. Tang has such awareness. Sumo smiled sweetly on the stage. Happy? No woman would be happy when her fiancé deliberately went astray when her hints were so obvious, right? Sumo looked at Pei Chichi, who was standing next to Laro Khan. It seemed that it was almost impossible for Shen Lian to marry Tang Yu. No matter how disappointed Shen Lian was, she still walked up to the stage and accepted the ring. Although Tang Yu put it on for her, she still could not feel happy. There was a huge difference between a wedding ring and an engagement ring. At that moment, Sumo said teasingly, Mr. Tang and Miss Shen are so lovey-dovey. But I'm curious about one thing. Mr. Tang calls Miss Shen President Shen and Miss Shen calls him Mr. Tang. I don't know if their relationship is not harmonious or if there's a special meaning. Can you share with me? Shen Lian smiled. Tang Yu doesn't want others to know about this private matter. Mr. Shen, you're really good at Tai Kai Sumo was already at the same level as the White Bone Demon. She turned to Tang Yu and asked, Mr. Tang, do you have anything interesting to share with Mr. Shen? Tang Yu smiled faintly. Ms. Su wants to know. Sumo's heart skipped a beat when she saw such a handsome man staring at her. Tang Yu smiled. If you want to know, we can have a drink later. This was blatant teasing, and he did not give Shen Lian any face at all. The sparkling diamond ring had dimmed a little. It turned out that this pair of fiancé and fiancée were not that loving. Tang Yu had even openly developed a relationship outside. Shen Lian was furious, but standing on the stage, she had to squeeze out a smile and pretend to be indifferent. She knew that this was a warning from Tang Yu. She had angered him tonight. Sumo's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly calmed down. Seriously, she was almost 40 years old, yet she was still being teased by a man who was not even 30. It was too embarrassing. Sumo covered her face. Mr. Tang, will Mr. Shen be unhappy about this? Tang Yu glanced at Shen Lian and said meaningfully, we respect each other. Oh, respect each other meant that they would play their own games. Shen Lian was very embarrassed, but she could not flare up. She could only force a smile and get off the stage. On the other side, Sumo did not let Tang Yu go. She tilted her head and looked at him. I wonder what kind of charity you're donating tonight, Mr. Tang? Tang Yu smiled faintly, and his whole body was warm. A humble painting that I drew myself. Chapter 8:13. The hostess pushed a huge painting rack over. It was covered with a piece of cloth, which made it look a little mysterious. Sumo was in high spirits after Shen Lian stepped down from the stage. It was rare for a noble man like Tang Yu to be approachable, so she was naturally in a good mood. She interacted with Tang Yu, and the male host seemed to have nothing to do with her. Sumo tilted her head and smiled. Can I ask Mr. Tang, this painting is a character? Tang Yu smiled. Sumo had seen her fair share of handsome men in the fashion industry, and some of them put in a lot of effort to get on her good side in order to get resources from her. To be honest, she had slept with quite a few of them, but none of them were as exciting as when she was with old Khan. However, Sumo, who was used to seeing handsome men, couldn't take her eyes off Tang Yu. Her heart was thumping. If old Khan was suitable for sweating and hand-to-hand combat, then Tang Yu was the kind of prince charming that she admired. Every woman had a young girl's dream, and Sumo was no exception. Moreover, it was less likely for a woman to have such a young girl's dream when she was older. Sumo snapped back to her senses. Can I take it off? Tang Yu smiled. Of course. He walked up and grabbed a corner of the cloth with his slender fingers before pulling it off. The oil painting, which was 60 by 80 in size, appeared out of thin air. Everyone gasped in surprise. It was a painting of a young girl, but only her back was visible. In the bright kitchen, sunlight shone in through the windows. A beautiful figure stood in front of the kitchen counter. She was probably making breakfast. Her long black hair was casually clipped with a clip, and she was wearing a long white t-shirt. Her slender and straight legs were extremely beautiful. She tilted her head slightly, and only her long eyelashes and plump lips could be seen. However, it was enough to make people fall in love at first sight. The quality of the painting gave people a sense of warmth. Although it was a painting with a woman as the main character, it didn't make people focus on how beautiful the girl was. Although a girl who could make Tang Yu fall in love with her was definitely a beauty, instead, it made people feel the warmth in the artist's heart, and it created a calm and peaceful state of mind. Sumo could tell at a glance that the girl in the picture was the one old Khan brought over. She could tell at a glance from her well-proportioned frame. She glanced at Pei Chichi, and saw that she was also a little shocked. She must have noticed it too. What a good show. Shun Lian had been slapped in the face. Although Sumo could tell, she knew how to put on a show. This must be President Shun. I didn't expect President Shun to be so virtuous. Actually, how could it be Shun Lian? One of Shun Lian's legs was already crippled. It was impossible for her to be barefooted. Even if she wore shoes, she would still need to wear socks. In the painting, she was barefooted, and each foot was delicate and moving. Sumo couldn't understand why Tang Yu would donate a painting like this when he had such deep feelings for her. Wouldn't it be better to keep it at home and admire it? Even though she had her doubts, she still teased Tang Yu. Mr. Tang, you can't bid for it later. If you want to get back Mr. Shun's painting, you have to show your love to the children in the mountainous area. Shun Lian's face was as cold as ice. She had no words to express her anger. That painting was of Pei Chichi. Sumo spoke up. Shun Lian's face was cold as she said word by word, "Of course, I will definitely show my love." Chapter 8:14. On the stage, Tang Yu remained indifferent. He stepped aside and looked at Pei Chichi. He had wanted to give her this painting, but he never had the chance. Today's result was bound to be delivered to her. Pei Chichi's expression was even worse than Shun Lian's when he glanced at her. How could she not know that this was an apartment in Xia City and that the girl in the painting was herself? What did Tang Yu mean? But she soon found out. Shun Lian clenched her teeth and raised the sign. Her whole body was burning with small flames, like a Saint Seiya. Everyone present also thought that the painting was Shun Lian. Although they knew that President Shun would be the winner in the end, they still raised the sign to join in the fun. The price of a single painting was raised to 12 million yuan. No one competed with Shun Lian anymore. Old Khan lowered his head and looked at his beloved disciple. "Do you want me to do it?" Pei Chichi looked at Old Khan's body and said faintly, "Master, for the sake of your kidney, forget it. It was just a painting." She didn't care. Old Khan didn't say anything else. Sumo was a little disappointed to see the result so soon, but it was a pity for this painting. Shun Lian's eyes were filled with victory. She walked up to the stage and was about to get the painting. Below the stage, a cold and clear voice sounded, "Wait a moment." Sumo's dead heart came back to life. She perked up and asked, "President Qin wants this painting too?" Qin Anlan also walked up to the stage and stood beside Sumo with Tang Yu. Sumo's heart beat faster. Qin Anlan's appearance was on the same level as Tang Yu's, and he was a master at flirting with women. Qin Anlan smiled and walked to the painting. He looked at it and then his eyes fell on Shun Lian. "Unfortunately, I also like this painting, Mr. Shun." The smile on Shun Lian's face was almost gone. Her face was very gloomy. But this painting was donated by Tang Yu. There's such a rule. Does President Shun have to bid for it? He tilted his head and looked at Sumo. "Miss Su, I don't really understand the rules here. Can you explain it to me?" Sumo had long disliked Shun Lian, so she was more than happy to answer Qin Anlan's question. "President Qin, there's no rule that states that apart from Mr. Tang himself, the highest bidder wins." Qin Anlan nodded in satisfaction and looked at Shun Lian. "President Shun, do you still want to follow the 15 million? Shun Lian raised her chin. Qin Anlan actually stood up for that bitch. Of course. She was expressionless. 20 million. Qin Anlan had a faint smile on his face. He touched the painting with his slender fingers and his expression turned gentle. "This painting is worth it." He turned and smiled. 50 million. Shun Lian gritted her teeth. 60 million. 100 million. Qin Anlan did not even blink. Shun Lian was furious. "Qin Anlan is a lunatic. He's going against me for a bitch." She wanted to continue shouting, But her position in Jin Taihe was not stable yet because Shen Zhongshan was not dead. If she continued to spend money willfully, the old men on the board would not let her off. So, no matter how unwilling she was, she gave up. Su Mo was laughing so hard that she couldn't close her legs. She walked over to Qin Anlan and placed the microphone by his lips. She said gently, "Our CEO Qin is really caring towards the children in the mountainous areas. I thank President Qin on their behalf." Chapter 8:15. Then, Qin Anlan changed the topic. "This painting looks like a girl I like, so I'm giving it to her." The crowd was in an uproar. Tang Yu was the one confessing his love for his fiancée. How did it turn into President Qin snatching his love away? Qin Anlan looked at Su Mo. "Can you give me a light?" Su Mo walked over and whispered into Qin Anlan's ear. Su Mo was a little surprised. She looked at Tang Yu and nodded. The light swept across the crowd and finally landed on Pei Chichi. If she had a choice, Pei Chichi would rather find a hole and hide in it. She was only there to take a few photos. How did she become the female lead? Please describe the psychological trauma Shen Lian is feeling. Qin Anlan quickly wrote a check and handed it to Su Mo. Then, he took the painting and walked towards Pei Chichi. The crowd automatically dispersed and formed a long path. The lights chased after him. At this moment, no one knew what was wrong with the band, but they actually played a famous love song. The crowd was in an uproar. Someone started clapping and shouting propose. 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 Pei Chichi stood there. She couldn't avoid it. Old Khan's voice rang in her ears. This guy is really brave. He knew that he would be rejected, but he still dared to do it. In the blink of an eye, Qin Anlan walked to Pei Chichi's side. He looked at her deeply and smiled. "Pei Chichi, this is for you." Pei Chichi's gaze landed on his face. Qin Anlan kept looking at her. They only had the memory of that night. If something had happened between them that night, perhaps Tang Yu would not be involved now. But perhaps he would not be involved anymore. Qin Anlan was a little regretful, but he was glad at the same time. After a long time, Pei Chichi chuckled and said, "President Qin, you may have mistaken me for someone else. It's not me up there. But in my heart, she is you." Qin Anlan's gaze was indifferent. He had never been an emotional person, but when he saw her again, he was sure that he wanted her. Not only did he possess her physically, but he also owned her completely. Qin Anlan smiled. "Pei Chichi, you don't need to feel burdened. You just need to accept it." Pei Chichi lowered her eyes. 100 million. He raised his eyes to look at the painting, and his gaze unexpectedly met Tang Yu's. Before she could reply, Old Khan had already picked it up. "This painting is so expensive. We have to treat it well when we get back." Pei Chichi's feelings were destroyed by Laro Khan. She wasn't his ancestor. Did he need to worship her? But since Laro Khan had already accepted it, it would be pretentious to push it back. Pei Chichi thanked him softly. Qin Anlan looked at her deeply and did not say anything else. Just as the two of them looked at each other and were speechless, Shen Lian's voice rang out. "Miss Pei, since you've obtained such a painting, shouldn't you also give some love to the children in the disaster area?" Her words were clearly making things difficult for Su Mo. Pei Chichi raised her eyes and looked at her. She could see that Su Mo's eyes were filled with malice. She felt a headache coming on. Given Pei Chichi's current situation, it was impossible for her to donate anything decent. Pei Chichi smiled when she saw the smugness in Shen Lian's eyes. She raised her head and looked at Qin Anlan. "President Qin, are you willing to spend 10 million to dance with me?" Qin Anlan smiled. "Of course." Pei Chichi held his arm and slowly walked to the center of the stage. Chapter 8:16. Pei Huan came over and leaned against Laro Khan. She said in an awkward voice, "Do you know that I slept with President Qin?" "President Qin slept with you, didn't he?" Laro Khan didn't give her any face. Girls should have some dignity. They slept all day long. Didn't they feel ashamed? Below the stage, Shen Lian was so angry that her whole body was trembling. "Pei Chichi, Pei Chichi held Qin Anlan's arm and slowly walked onto the stage. She was wearing a silver dress, and Qin Anlan was wearing black. Her slender figure made him look taller and slender. The music started, and she bloomed in his arms, like an orchid in the dark night. At this moment, Qin Anlan was doomed. Tang Yu watched quietly from below the stage. Everything was under his control, but he still felt pain in his heart. He still cared that she was in someone else's arms. Shun Lian raised her chin and said, "Is this what you want? To help your ex-wife find another man?" She smiled coldly. "You're really a competent brother and ex-husband." Tang Yu looked straight at the stage, and after a long time, he said calmly, "Isn't it what you want to see them together?" Shun Lian had mixed feelings. Maybe it was. If Pei Chichi and Qin Anlan were together, she would not be able to pester Tang Yu anymore. However, was Tang Yu willing to do that? She doubted it. But at this time, she wanted to stab Tang Yu. Only then could she calm down. Pei Chichi has so many men around her, her so-called master, Qin Anlan, and even Lin Jinrong. Shun Lian's face showed a touch of certainty. "Tang Yu, no matter how unwilling you are, Pei Chichi hates you so much. She will be with someone else sooner or later." On the other hand, Tang Yu's face was very calm. As he watched the two dancing on the stage, his gaze became even more unfathomable. Yes, this was the result he wanted. He had never cared about Qin Anlan. What he cared about was Jinrong, and Qin Anlan was a very good stumbling block. Even if he felt uncomfortable in his heart, it was more reassuring than being with Jinrong. This night was destined to be a night of heartbreak. Against his will, he pushed Pei Chichi to Qin Anlan's side to keep Jinrong in check. Perhaps he needed Qin Anlan to protect Chichi when he was not around. Her safety was more important than being with him. Tang Yu did not continue watching. He quietly left the venue, walked to the smoking area outside, and smoked alone. Shun Lian approached quietly. In the smoke, her beautiful eyes were filled with sadness. "Tang Yu, why can't you forget her?" Tang Yu was still leaning against the wall, and he smiled lightly. "Sometimes, I'd rather forget her myself." In that case, he could let go and let Chichi be happy, instead of forcing her to wait for him like this. He knew that the waiting was hard. He did not want her to suffer, but he could not let it go. No matter how hard it was, how difficult it was, no matter what, he had to wait. Shun Lian did not understand feelings. What she wanted was to possess something. To possess something that did not belong to her. No one could save her, including herself. As he said this, Shun Lian smiled gently. Her smile was strange. "Tang Yu, that's great. We are the same now," she said word by word, the same pain, the same no future, and the endless waiting. Tang Yu did not look at her. He put out the cigarette, and disappeared at the end of the aisle. Tears blurred Shun Lian's eyes. Chapter 8:17. It wasn't that she hadn't seduced him before, or even drugged him. But, he had always used that cold gaze to tell her that he didn't want her. Shun Lian stood under the chandelier. Her shadow was very long, and she looked very lonely. After Pei Chichi and Qin Anlan had finished their dance, the charity ball was also over. She turned around to look for Laro Khan, but he had already disappeared. She noticed that Pei Huan had disappeared together with him. Pei Chichi sighed. Pei Huan really didn't want to give up. The main reason why she didn't agree was that Laro Khan was 38 years old this year, 16 years older than Pei Huan, and he was a playboy, even though Pei Huan was not a decent person. She stood in the atrium of the hotel and dialed Laro Khan's cell phone, but no one picked up for a long time. Pei Chichi was a little annoyed. She dialed again, but there was still no answer. At this moment, she heard a faint voice. "Chichi." She looked up in confusion at the car that had stopped in front of her. The car window rolled down slowly, and Tang Yu's face appeared in front of her. He sat in the car and looked ahead. "Get in." Pei Chichi took a step back. There were steps behind her, and she almost fell. She was supported by a pair of hands. She looked sideways and saw that it was Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan helped Pei Chichi stand up straight and smiled. "I'll take you back." Pei Chichi wanted to reject him, but she turned around to look at Tang Yu. He sat in the car and looked at her with a burning gaze. She lowered her eyes and said to Qin Anlan, "Okay." Even though he knew that he was being used, Qin Anlan was willing to do it. "My car is over there." Pei Chichi nodded and followed him. Tang Yu's car was right in front of them. Qin Anlan suddenly paused. He took off his jacket and placed it on her shoulders. She was stunned for a moment and looked at the clothes she was wearing. "Chichi, it's cold at night." Qin Anlan puts one hand in his trouser pocket and smiles gently in the strong night wind. She did not make a sound, nor did she refuse. Tang Yu got out of the car, put his hand on the door, and called her name. "Pei Chichi. Don't go with him." His voice was stern, but Pei Chichi was absent-minded. He was Shen Lian's fiancé. Why was he still pestering her now? Moreover, she was his biological sister. Pei Chichi's eyes were glistening with tears, which were moving under the moonlight. Qin Anlan stretched out his hand. "Let's go." Tang Yu's heart was heaving up and down, and his gaze was stern. Under his gaze, Pei Chichi's hand was held by Qin Anlan. When that soft hand was held in his palm, he decided not to let go, whether she was against her will or not. The night wind was strong, and a handsome young man stood beside the car, his fingers clenched into a fist. Qin Anlan sent Pei Chichi to the back seat, closed the car door, and met Tang Yu's eyes. He smiled faintly and got into the car. Soon, the car slid into the driveway and disappeared into the traffic. Tang Yu squinted and looked at her for a while. All these were within his expectations, but her reaction and her choice still hurt his eyes and his heart. Yes, why would she listen to him? Why would she be willing to be with her brother? It was not that he did not understand what Lin Yun said that day. Time was the cruelest, and it was enough to change everything. And he, in order not to let Shen Lian suspect, couldn't stop Jinrong and Qin Anlan from getting close to her, and even let her live with that old man. He gave her freedom and kept her safe. As long as he could see her, he would be happy to see her happy, but he would not be happy to see her too happy. He was afraid that she would forget him, afraid that she would never come back. Chapter 8:18. Qin Anlan's car arrived at the condominium and Pei Chichi said coldly, "Stop the car." He stopped the car but did not let her get out. The car door was locked and she could not get out. Qin Anlan's long fingers stroked the steering wheel gently and his voice was soft. "You threw me away after using me. Pei Chichi, is that so?" She sat in the back seat and said coldly, "You knew that you were using President Qin but you were still willing. Why are you blaming others now?" He chuckled. "Pei Chichi, my help always comes with a price." He was so domineering and charming, but Pei Chichi was no longer the Pei Chichi of the past. She had been with Old Khan for a long time and had become thicker. Using Old Khan's words, there's no such thing as owing or owing. It's voluntary. What do I owe? Pei Chichi leaned against the back seat lazily and met Qin Anlan's gaze in the rearview mirror. The neon lights of the street were in the background. The stars made the young man's eyes look like they were dyed with fireworks. He did not speak and only stared at her. After a long time, Qin Anlan said, "I heard that Lin Jinrong wants to be with you. Pei Chichi, have you considered it?" She looked at his eyes for a while and smiled. "It has nothing to do with you." Qin Anlan stretched his hand out of the window and closed the rearview mirror. After that, he turned his body and looked straight into her eyes. He said slowly, "Pei Chichi, I've confessed." Pei Chichi supported her sharp chin with her slender arm. "Do I have to accept President Qin's confession?" He just looked at her. "Don't forget, I was married, and I had an abortion." Chichi smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes that was hard to detect. Qin Anlan's handsome face rested on the back of the seat, which made him look a little childish. He smiled. "Even Lin Jinrong doesn't care, so why should I?" Pei Chichi had no choice. "Qin Anlan, there are so many women in your company. Why do you have to pester me like this? Is it fun?" His gaze was pure and kind. "I'll answer you only after I've played with you." Then, he added, "I'm not playing around. How about this, Pei Chichi, how about we play with each other?" "Boring." Pei Chichi patted the car door and said, "Let me out." He looked at her crazed expression and his gaze changed from pure to dangerous. "Pei Chichi, Is my car that easy to sit in? With that said, he reached out to hold her little chin and narrowed his eyes. Shouldn't there be some fare? Pei Chichi slapped his hand away, took out 200 yuan from her purse, and threw it to him. Is it enough? Qin Anlan was thrown all over his face, 2 pieces of grandpa marrow fell from his handsome face. He reached out to grab her hand, but Pei Chichi escaped. In the dark car, Qin Anlan looked at her and said in a seductive voice, "Are you afraid?" "What am I afraid of?" Pei Chichi laughed coldly. "Qin Anlan, stop your tricks. I'm not one of those small-time celebrities in your company. I'm not someone you can buy with 500,000 yuan. This time, he successfully grabbed her hand and dragged her to the back of his seat. Their faces were facing each other and their bodies were only separated by the back of the seat. His eyes were clear and bright as he looked at her. King Entertainment and Qin Anlan, is that enough? Lunatic. Pei Chichi bit her lip and glared at him. Chapter 8:19. Qin Anlan chuckled, still holding onto her wrist and gazing at her with his clear eyes. I'm not joking. I'm serious. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. It's fine if you don't agree, but you have to pay me now. He held her with one hand and opened the car door with the other. At the same time, he kissed her on the lips. Pei Chichi put her hand on his shoulder and tried to push him away, but Qin Anlan's hand was faster. His lips were half an inch away from hers, and his voice was hoarse. Pei Chichi, Tang Yu is right behind us. Her body stiffened instantly. Don't look back. Qin Anlan chuckled. Unless you still want to be with him. His fingers caressed her little face. That soft and delicate touch made his heart flutter. It was just a light kiss, just touching her lips like this, was enough to make his heart palpitate and tremble. It was not about lust, but desire. He wanted to hold her in his arms and take pity on her. He wanted to heal her wounds bit by bit, both physically and mentally. She said that she was married and had children. When had Qin Anlan ever cared about that? He couldn't even remember the number of women he had slept with, but he didn't remember any of them. The only one he remembered was Pei Chichi, who didn't manage to sleep with him. That night, she lay on his bed and called out another man's name. He wanted to forget about her, and he succeeded in doing so. In the past year, he had slept with countless women. Occasionally, when he went home and lay on that bed, he would still think of that thin but alluring body. Later on, he changed the bed and threw away the mattress and bedsheets. He even changed the bedroom. He couldn't figure it out until she appeared again, a silver gown wrapped around her slender body. There was no longer any pain, and she looked like a little fairy who had fallen into the mortal world. He was cold to her, but his heart was burning with passion. He wanted to catch her. How could he not know what Tang Yu was thinking? How could he not know that he was just being used? How could he not know that he was just an outsider stuck between the two of them? On this point, Qin Anlan and Lin Jinrong had the same idea. His thin lips gently touched her soft lips. Qin Anlan was doomed. Many years later, Qin Anlan had a wife and a daughter and lived a happy life. However, he would occasionally think of this night in the dead of night. Later on, no matter how happy he was, no matter how glorious he was, he didn't have the vigor he had that night, and he wasn't as high-spirited as he was now. Pei Chichi's legs were soft, not because of Qin Anlan's kiss, but because of Tang Yu. She slowly pushed Qin Anlan away, sat in the carriage and tilted her head. In the fierce night wind, the man she loved deeply stood with the wind, his face becoming increasingly cold under the moonlight. She looked at him. It was the same for him. Their gazes were glued to each other. Everything had changed. After a long while, Qin Anlan got out of the car first. He walked to the back seat and held the car door for her to get out. When she stood on the ground, Qin Anlan helped her and said in a low voice, "Think about it carefully. Pei Chichi, I'm more suitable for you than Lin Jinrong." Pei Chichi looked at Tang Yu in a daze. Qin Anlan thought that she didn't hear him and said it again. This time, she raised her head and looked at his face. Chapter 8:20. She didn't want to love someone so passionately anymore, and she didn't want to give herself completely to the other party. Never again. Qin Anlan's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect that she would reject him so decisively. Just as he was about to say something, his waist was hugged, her soft body was pressed against his. It was soft and smooth. This was probably the so-called soft and fragrant jade. Pei Chichi hugged Qin Anlan, and her voice was seductive. President Qin, I predict that you will have a fight later. Her fingers touched his ribs, and she looked up and smiled mischievously. The ribs here, are they done? I don't necessarily lose. His eyes narrowed, and he was fascinated by her playful and lively expression. In Tang Yu's eyes, their interaction was simply burning with anger. Yes, he wanted Qin Anlan to keep Jinrong in check, so that Chichi and Jinrong wouldn't be together so soon. But what did he see now? He saw Pei Chichi and Qin Anlan hugging each other. Was this the speed of a rocket? Tang Yu couldn't bear it. Pei Chichi jumped away lightly and said goodbye to Qin Anlan. She also mouthed to him, "Come on." Qin Anlan couldn't help laughing. He stood and watched her enter the elevator. After sending off his little fairy, he was faced with a fierce beast. Qin Anlan frowned and smiled. Not feeling well? He took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a puff. You drew a painting, and I spent 100 million to send it to Pei Chichi. Tang Yu, you can't be too greedy. She is not yours anymore. Tang Yu stood under the moonlight, and he looked more and more noble, but there was also a touch of loneliness. Qin Anlan grew up with him. How could he not see that Shen Lian must have something in her hands, which was why Tang Yu was so afraid of her? He smiled. Actually, if you can't give her happiness, why not let go? Tang Yu said in a hoarse voice, Qin Anlan, she will be mine in the end. Qin Anlan stretched out his finger and shook it gently. No, Tang Yu, you're wrong. Pei Chichi belongs to herself now. He laughed wantonly. Tang Yu, it's not that you can't see it, you just don't dare to admit it. Right now, Pei Chichi might still love you, but she also hates you. She doesn't want to be with anyone, but you, me, and Lin Jinrong. Among the three of us, she will never be with you. However, at this time, Qin Anlan did not think that when Tang Yu temporarily gave up, he had grabbed the last straw for his love with Pei Chichi. When necessary, he would let it go. Close the door and be careful. Even if Pei Chichi fell in love with Qin Anlan or Lin Jinrong, she would still return to his side in the end. This was the humblest thought in Tang Yu's heart, and the deepest scar. Then don't touch her. Tang Yu slowly took off his coat and threw it aside. Qin Anlan finished smoking the cigarette in his hand, threw it on the ground, and stepped on it to put it out. He looked down and chuckled. Do you want to fight? He raised his head again. I heard that men who are dissatisfied with their desires will like violence. The veins on Tang Yu's forehead were bulging. Qin Anlan smiled again. Do you dare to say that you had sex with Shen Lian? Tang Yu's punch was coming. Qin Anlan was prepared and quickly dodged. Chapter 821. Qin Anlan had long disliked Tang Yu. The two of them pounced on each other like two wild beasts. However, he had really underestimated the fighting power of a man with unsatisfied desires. Damn, he's really ruthless. He wiped the blood from the corner of his lips and pounced on her again. Bastard. You said you don't want it, but you're very honest, right? She's mine. Yours. Why don't you go and see if Pei Chichi still wants you? Let's see if she'll let you go or not. Violence mixed with rude words. Under the dim light, the two of them were inseparable. Pei Chichi went upstairs and thought for a while before opening the door to Old Khan's condominium. As she expected, Old Khan was not back yet. She walked to the window of the living room and looked down. The two wild beasts were still fighting. Their stamina was so good. Pei Chichi went to take a shower. When she came out, she took out her cell phone and called Old Khan, but his cell phone was switched off. She threw her cell phone away, opened a bag of snacks, and leaned against the window to watch the wild beasts fight. She would call Old Khan's cell phone every once in a while, but no one picked up. Eventually, she threw her cell phone aside and leaned against the window to eat her snacks. At this moment, Old Khan was being pestered by Su Mo in one of the suites. They were old friends, so she was very familiar with each other's bodies and knew what the other liked. He fell asleep at one point. It was like a raging fire that was burning. Old Khan's sweat and Sumo's sweat made the autumn night a little hotter. After 2 rounds, Old Khan calmed down for a while and flipped over to lie down. He reached for his pants on the bedside table and took out a cigarette. Sumo's face was flushed. She propped herself up and lit the cigarette for him before lying down again. Her slender fingers stroked Old Khan's showing fur and murmured with satisfaction, "It's been so many years, and you've never stopped doing this." Old Khan took a deep puff and exhaled. Coupled with his rough appearance, the entire suite was filled with the smell of his hormones. He glanced at her and smiled. "Aren't you the same? You're still as greedy as before. You can't satisfy it no matter what." Sumo was a little angry, but it didn't seem like she was angry. Instead, she felt sad. How could she not understand Old Khan's pun? She and he used to be together, nothing, but, she has ambition. At that time, he wasn't her only man, and she wasn't his only woman, but during the most difficult days, they had indeed hugged each other through the most difficult nights. She was addicted to the Vanity Fair and had cried many times. She remembered how Laro Khan hugged her and patted her back with his thick palms, coaxing her. "Sumo, if you really can't take it anymore, you can quit. I'll take care of you." He raised her, but at that time, he was just a part-time worker with a monthly salary of 10,000 yuan. He might be able to feed her, but he really couldn't give her what she wanted. After that, they separated. Even before she had succeeded, she knew that if she didn't leave now, she would agree to Laro Khan's request. Not only would that cause her to stagnate, but it would also cause Laro Khan to lose his direction in life. So from the looks of it today, her choice to separate was the right one. Even after all these years, she would always think of how Laro Khan had slapped her when she had broken up with him. Chapter 822. Old Khan let go and left B City for H City. After that, Laro Khan became a dazzling new star in the photography world, winning international awards and getting tired of it. It only took him 2 years to do so. No one knew how hard Old Khan worked during those 2 years and how many times he sacrificed his life for outdoor shoots. At that time, he was living a befuddled and numb life. Many people chased after his works, but only he himself knew how soulless those works were. How hollow. All along, no one understood him. Old Khan squinted his eyes. His heart was throbbing because of the past. Sumo's slender fingers curled around Old Khan's showing hair. Her voice was a little hoarse because of the passion. "Tell me the truth, do you have any disciples that you like?" Laro Khan puffed a smoke ring at her delicate face and held her slender body with his big hands. He said in a hoarse voice, "I like you better. After so many years, it's still the best to fuck this body." He carried Sumo and walked toward the bathroom. Sumo knew what he wanted to do. She leaned on his shoulder and hit him, screaming, "Old Khan, put me down. You shameless old hooligan, don't you like it when I act like a hooligan? Sumo, you little bitch." He pulled her down and covered her mouth with his bearded lips. He kissed her intensely like the stopper of a hot water bottle. Sumo was a very shrewish woman. However, she would only be as soft as a puddle of water under Old Khan's body. She hugged his strong neck and kissed him. The warm wine lingered on Sumo's body. Just as she was intoxicated, Laro Khan suddenly stopped holding her. Sumo opened her eyes and looked at Old Khan. Her voice was hoarse. "Old Khan, what's wrong?" Hot water splashed on their faces and flowed down. Both of their faces were covered in water, and they couldn't see each other clearly. However, Old Khan looked at her very seriously and asked very seriously, "Sumo, if I ask you again many years ago, what would you say?" Sumo was stunned. After looking at him for a long time, she slid down from his body and wrapped herself with a towel. "Weren't we happy just now?" Old Khan frowned and looked at Sumo. "Are you happy?" Sumo wrapped herself in a bathrobe and walked out. She took out Old Khan's cigarette and smoked it. She watched as Old Khan walked out naked. He stood in front of her with a bulging erection. It had not subsided yet. Sumo took a puff of smoke. This man was almost 40 years old, but his appetite and stamina were still unbelievably good. His muscles were so strong that she was about to fall apart, but, so what, she thought desolately that Laro Khan wanted to be with her and marry her. She was well aware of that. But she couldn't give birth. She had been pregnant before, the child of a married tycoon. She had suffered a massive hemorrhage due to ectopic pregnancy. After the operation, the doctor told her that she had no chance of having another child. That day, she stood alone in a daze, thinking of nothing else but Laro Khan. Because she knew that no matter how many men she slept with, Laro Khan could forgive them all and wouldn't mind. But she couldn't live without children. He is a romantic and wants to live an idyllic life. But she was just a literary chicken that could no longer lay eggs. Sumo took a deep puff of her cigarette in frustration and looked at Old Khan. Must you bring up something so disappointing? Old Khan's pupils contracted rapidly, and the word hurt was clearly written on his face. He rubbed his neck and asked, "Is this something that's disappointing?" Sumo was initially feeling a little passionate, but it was all gone now. She had always been a decisive woman. Since she couldn't be with Old Khan, she shouldn't drag it out. Chapter 8:23. With that, Sumo picked up Old Khan's clothes and threw them at his feet. "Put on your clothes and leave." She walked to the door and opened it. However, the moment the door opened, Pei Huan was sitting by the door like a stray puppy with tears in her eyes. At this moment, Old Khan was completely naked. In fact, he was even in that state. Pei Huan's rosy lips were slightly agape. She was obviously shocked, her eyes turned even redder. She looked at Old Khan's body, which was covered in red marks. There were hickeys and scratches. Sumo only had a bathrobe hanging loosely on her body, and her face was flushed. Even an idiot would know what had happened. Pei Huan looked at this and that. Then, she burst into tears and ran away. Sumo rolled her eyes and slammed the door shut. She walked up to Old Khan and poked his chest with her slender fingers. "How dare you get involved with someone like Pei Huan?" Old Khan grabbed her hand and flung it away as he started to put on his clothes. Sumo did not give up and pulled his hair again. "Old Khan, did you hear what I said?" He narrowed his eyes. "Sumo, Chief Editor Su, what right do you have to meddle in my business?" He pulled up his zipper, but it was stuck. He pulled it up forcefully. It was a little painful, but not as painful as the pain in his heart. Sumo glared at him. Was he really going to leave? This old jerk. He was an old hooligan. Old Khan looked at her coldly. "Sumo, you haven't changed at all." Sumo felt a stabbing pain in her heart. She pursed her lips tightly as she watched him walk out and slam the door shut. The perspiration on her body was starting to turn cold, and it was very uncomfortable. Old Khan walked out to the elevator and saw Pei Huan squatting there. He walked into the elevator and was hugged from behind the moment he entered. He pressed the button for the first floor and said coldly, "Why? You're willing to pay for it." Pei Huan was lying on his back. His back was very wide, just like Pei Ming's. "You slept with her?" Pei Huan's small hands hugged his waist and slowly slid down to his abdomen. She noticed how pathetic he was. Old Khan had a bad habit. His body was as impulsive as a beast, and he would get up the moment a woman teased him. Especially beautiful women. Pei Huan bit the back of his neck like a little female beast. "She didn't suck you dry." Old Khan was in a bad mood. He looked into the mirror and saw the little fairy clinging to him. "Pei Huan, do you really want to be fucked by me?" His voice did not carry a trace of emotion, and there was even a rare hint of disdain. Pei Huan did not mind. She kissed his neck and his skin that still had the scent of another woman. Old Khan stretched out his hand, and the cameraman's head was twisted off. Then, there was the sound of clothes being torn apart. Pei Huan widened her eyes and looked at Old Khan. Pain, she was in great pain. However, Old Khan did not stop and tore her into two halves. That night, Pei Huan learned what it meant to be fierce, what it meant to be a beast. A blood dome appeared on Old Khan's shoulder. Pei Huan had bitten. When it was over, he panted heavily. When he calmed down, he felt a little regretful. Firstly, it was because he knew that he was venting his anger on her. Secondly, the girl under him was younger than him by 15 or 16 years. She could be his daughter. Chapter 824. If Pei Huan said yes at this moment, Old Khan would really marry her. But Pei Huan was half serious. She just wanted to have a taste of him. It was as simple as that. She wanted to monopolize Pei Chichi's body. Everything was good and she wanted to take it for herself. But now, she realized that this man did not belong to Pei Chichi. He belonged to another woman. That woman could let him be naked, open the door, and tell him to get lost, and he would not have any temper. At that time, Pei Huan knew that Old Khan loved Sumo. It was a genuine love. No matter how many women he had experienced, Sumo would always be the light in his heart. Just like Pei Chichi and Lin Jinrong, Pei Huan was not stupid. She would be stupid if she asked him to take responsibility. Wearing his jacket, Pei Huan looked at him and said, "I only wanted to sleep with you once. Now that I've slept with you, it's nothing special." She did not seem to care. Old Khan did not say anything. He pulled up his pants and left. After he left, Pei Huan stood in the elevator until he was far away. Then, she kicked the elevator door forcefully. What? He just zipped up and left. He did not even send her back. Pei Huan's heart was empty. She had obtained Old Khan's body. Although it was painful, it was actually quite comfortable. But her heart felt even more empty. She was like a child who had wanted something for a long time. Then, she realized that she wanted more, but she did not know how to get it. Old Khan hailed a cab back. When he parked the car in front of the apartment, he saw two beasts fighting. He smiled. It was an intense fight. Ignoring them, he unbuttoned his shirt and went upstairs. When he reached the apartment, the lights were on. Obviously, Pei Chichi was there. When he opened the door, he saw her leaning against the window. She was wearing long pajamas and walking barefoot. Old Khan took off his shirt and went into the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, Pei Chichi was still leaning against the window. He went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. He took out 2 cans of beer and handed one to her. Then, he looked downstairs. They were really good at fighting. Old Khan raised his eyebrows. Won't anything happen if they fight like this? Pei Chichi's little face was expressionless. She just looked at Laro Khan and looked downstairs. She said faintly, "I smell perfume on you." Old Khan sniffed herself. How could she still smell after taking a shower? Pei Chichi lay down and asked lazily, "Who are you with?" Old Khan's heart skipped a beat. He raised his head and gulped down half a can of drink. After a while, he decided to hide the matter between him and Sumo. If he told Sumo about it, his little disciple would probably kill him. After pondering for a while, Old Khan said slowly, "Well, I have something to say." Pei Chichi's gaze was still on the 2 people downstairs. Weren't they tired after fighting for so long? Old Khan's voice rang in her ears, Chichi, I slept with Pei Huan. Qin Anlan was knocked to the ground, and Tang Yu kicked him twice. So violent. Wait, what did Old Khan say? Pei Chichi turned her head and looked at him. Old Khan smiled bitterly. I fell asleep in a moment of heat. Pei Chichi glared at him. Old Khan wanted to smoke, but she was so fierce that he did not dare to move. He scratched his head and said, "She doesn't want me to take responsibility, so, that's it." That was it. After a long time, Pei Chichi snapped back to reality. She looked straight at Old Khan and narrowed her eyes. Your perfume. Chapter 825. Pei Chichi's voice was very slow and light, but it gave off a hair-raising feeling. Pei Huan doesn't need such a mature perfume. Old Khan, think about it carefully. Did you miss anything that you didn't tell me? Old Khan's eyes were as wide as saucers, and he said gruffly, what could there be? Like the owner of the perfume? Pei Chichi grabbed the front of his bathrobe. Who were you with before Pei Huan? Old Khan stared at Pei Chichi for a long time before he said gruffly, with Sumo slept with her? Old Khan's eyes widened, and his pupils shrank. He didn't say a word. At this moment, Pei Chichi was sure that Pei Huan had used Sumo's second-hand goods tonight. You're amazing. 2 in one night. Pei Chichi threw the snacks in her hand, picked up something from the side, and threw it at Old Khan. Old Khan jumped up and begged for mercy as he ran, "But you promised not to hit my face. Don't you have any shame?" Pei Chichi didn't care. "I said you can't sleep with Pei Huan. Not only did you sleep with her, but you also slept with someone else. You can sleep with her in the future." After throwing the things in her hand, Pei Chichi picked up the things around her and threw them at Old Khan. The apartment was like a battlefield. The fight was intense downstairs, but it was even more intense upstairs. Old Khan didn't dare to fight back. On one hand, he felt guilty. On the other hand, he didn't want to fight with a girl. He was rough, and what if he hurt her? Pei Chichi had nothing else to throw, so she took off her slippers and hit Old Khan. Old Khan hugged his head, opened the door, and walked out. "Can't I leave?" But how could Pei Chichi let him go so easily? The more he admitted defeat, the more ferocious she became. Tang Yu and Qin Anlan were beating each other up, but they suddenly stopped. They just watched as Pei Chichi chased after Old Khan. Both of them were in their pajamas, and one of them was barefoot and holding slippers. They rushed out of the elevator just like that. It was a scene that no one could imagine. Are we still going to fight? Qin Anlan glanced at Tang Yu, got up, took out 2 crumpled cigarettes from his pocket, straightened them, and handed one to Tang Yu. Tang Yu took it and stood with Qin Anlan, watching the 2 people running over there. Qin Anlan suddenly said, "In fact, none of us can give her happiness like Laro Khan. That was because Laro Tsu only knew how to give, and would never ask her to take out something she didn't want to take out. She was full of energy and happiness when she was with Laro Khan. Tang Yu, if you let go, I'll let go. What do you think?" Qin Anlan suddenly had a lofty aspiration. Tang Yu raised her head slightly and unbuttoned a few buttons on her shirt, revealing her jade-like skin and sexy collarbone. "I can't do it." He turned his head sideways. "Qin Anlan, I'm different from you. You just like Pei Chichi, her character, and her appearance. But I'm different. To me, Chichi is my life." He would never give up on her. No matter how difficult it was, he would wait for that day. He also believed that her love and hatred for him would last until that day, and she would not fall in love with someone else. If she could love someone else so easily, it would not be love anymore. As the night breeze blew, he watched as Pei Chichi gradually stopped running. She was looking at him in a daze. Her eyes looked pitiful. Tang Yu smiled warmly at her and walked over slowly. Chapter 8:26. Pei Chichi stood still with one of her slippers in her hand. She threw it away mechanically. However, after throwing it away, her feet were still bare. Her fair and delicate feet were very alluring, just like the day when she walked to his room door. Only in front of him would she behave so helplessly, as though her IQ was not on the line. Tang Yu walked over slowly and picked up her slippers. Before she could react, he squatted down in front of her humbly and held her smooth little feet. Her little toes were as beautiful as little enoki mushrooms. His fingers could not help but caress them and quickly put them on for her. Pei Chichi shrunk her feet and wanted to escape. However, his palm held hers and did not allow her to escape. Following that, he stood up and slowly moved his hand up to hold her slender waist. When she came back to her senses, she was pressed against the body of his black limousine. Her back was cold, and in front of her was his warm body. Beside them were Qin Anlan and Laro Khan. Laro Khan was quite happy. No matter who it was that had dragged Pei Chichi away, he had to thank them. Yes, he had to thank them handsomely. However, the next second, he was shocked. Damn, they really kissed. Pei Chichi's gaze fell on the corner of Tang Yu's lips. There was a trace of blood and the corner of his lips was bruised. It was obvious that he was injured. She looked at him in a daze while his slender fingers touched her red lips. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. "You let him kiss you?" She seemed to have sensed danger as she lifted her eyes and stared at him. However, in the next second, her lips were swallowed by him, and he sucked on them like a raging wave. He rolled her up and tossed her into the sky before falling back down. It was another round of intense kissing. It was intense and repeated. Just like that, he kept being tossed around like a small boat on the sea, unable to reach the shore. When she came back to her senses, she realized that he was scalding hot. Everywhere was scalding hot. His well-defined fingers held her little face, and his other hand threaded through her long hair. He pulled her close to him savagely, and their lips touched at a negative distance. She felt as if she was going to melt from his heat. Her legs were so weak that she couldn't react at all. Those fragmented voices were all crushed and swallowed by his lips and tongue. His body struggled slightly as he was pressed against the car even more forcefully. Tang Yu seemed to have gone mad. He arched his body and adjusted his face to make it easier for him to kiss her more deeply. Laro Khan chuckled, while Qin Anlan's expression was unfathomable. She knew that Tang Yu was putting on a show for her because he had kissed Pei Chichi before. However, that light kiss couldn't even be called a kiss. It could only be called a contact between lips. The kiss in front of her was filled with hope, as if Tang Yu could break through everything and take her at any time. Even the air was so warm that it was about to explode. At this moment, Qin Anlan was deeply saddened. He said that he wanted to pursue Pei Chichi, but now she was kissed by Tang Yu, who had a fiancé. She was almost at the point where she wanted a car Z, but he couldn't do anything about it. He didn't even have the courage to pull them apart. Pei Chichi finally regained some strength and gave him a slap. Tang Yu didn't dodge and let her little hand hit his handsome face. However, when her hand left his face, he caught her little hand. He didn't say anything, but his gaze was lingering. There was a ring on the ring finger of the hand that was holding her hand. Chapter 8:27. Pei Chichi's eyes were a little blurred. She looked at the ring and pursed her lips. His heart throbbed painfully. She raised her head and looked at him. What does this mean? Her words were like a sharp blade. She was in pain, but he was in more pain than she was. He held onto her little hand and slowly but forcefully pulled her little hand to his cheek. The cold man's ring was pressed against her cold little face. At this moment, Pei Chichi wanted to cry. Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, I'll wait for you. These words were like a curse, which successfully made Pei Chichi unable to sleep that night. At this moment, she looked at him with countless little stars in her eyes. Her body shrank, she bit her lip and looked at him in disbelief, as if she was looking at a lunatic. After that, she ran away. She ran away and didn't come back to get a slipper. Old Khan sighed, walked over to pick up the slipper, and walked slowly into the elevator. Only Qin Anlan and Tang Yu were left at the scene. Qin Anlan walked over and chuckled. He looked at Tang Yu. Do you feel better after washing Pei Chichi's little mouth with your own saliva? Tang Yu turned around. Qin Anlan's smile became mocking. Tang Yu, do you know that you are a lunatic? A lunatic in love. He wasn't sure at first, but now he was sure that his biggest enemy wasn't Lin Jinrong, but Tang Yu. Not for anything else, but because the person Pei Chichi loved was Tang Yu. Qin Anlan had seen tonight what it meant to be completely used. He was such a fool. The funny thing was that he was still unwilling to give up and was still willing to be used by Tang Yu again and again. Because he couldn't bear to give up. He tried to give up, but he failed. Old Khan returned to the apartment. Pei Chichi wasn't there. He stood at her door for a moment, then knocked. Slippers. I don't want it anymore. Her voice came from inside. Old Khan grinned and didn't say anything more. Tang Yu was really his savior. As soon as he showed up, Pei Xiaoqi immediately stopped acting. What happened to the energy that was chasing him just now? It was all gone. Sure enough, everything has its vanquisher. Laro Khan sighed. He knocked on the door. Are you all right? Pei Chichi's voice was a little nasal. Old Khan, go away. Oh, he was really angry. Old Khan took the slippers and went back. Anyway, this girl would calm down. He could just come back tomorrow to get it. He returned to his side and lay on the sofa. He was not in a good mood. After all, he was rejected by Sumo once again. Sumo was the only one that Laro Khan truly had feelings for. However, his biggest mistake tonight was sleeping with Pei Huan. Old Khan was a man who respected women. He really didn't despise Pei Huan. However, how could two people who didn't love each other be together? If he had slept with her, then forget it. That night, Many people were destined to have a sleepless night. Tang Yu's car didn't go straight back to the rose garden. Instead, he drove to a secluded clubhouse. It was quiet all the way until he pushed open the door of a private room. The person inside had his back facing him. Tang Yu didn't ask him to turn around. He went over and sat down. The two of them were silent. After a long time, he asked softly, "How is Shenjongshan?" The man stood in the dark and said softly, "I suspect that Shenjongshan has recovered." Tang Yu's fingers tightened. Chapter 8:28. In the darkness, the man continued to speak in a light tone, but every word was enough to change the situation of B City. But, the real power of Jin Taihe is now in the hands of Shen Lian, and Shen Zhongshan is probably at his wit's end. The man paused. Maybe, he wants more. Tang Yu knew very well what that more was. In this game of chess, the one he wanted the most was Chichi, the little wife he had left behind. And what Shen Zhongshan wanted was not only Jin Taihe, but also an heir. It was obviously impossible for Shen Lian, and the only blood relation of Shen Zhongshan, was, and when this veil was lifted, part of the truth was bound to be known by Pei Chichi. He couldn't stop it, and he didn't want to stop it. Maybe today, he should give it his all. Tang Yu closed his eyes, thinking of the scene of Qin Anlan kissing Chichi tonight. Damn it, at that time, he almost rushed over and wanted to take her away and hide her in a place where no one could find her. There was no Jinrong, no Qin Anlan. Maybe, he should abandon the identity of the brother, even if she would hate him more. But, it could also let him get close to her legitimately, not as a perverted brother who wanted to possess his sister. Tang Yu was silent for a while, and disappeared in the dark room. And the man who had been carrying his body slowly turned back at this time, and there was a touch of pain on his handsome face. That face, was it him? Pei Chichi got up early in the morning, and her head was dizzy. Last night was like a dream. BMW, fancy clothes, diamond jewelry. Tang Yu, she was stunned for a while, and then laughed at herself. Pei Chichi, that has nothing to do with you. You are just a small photographer. If Laro Khan is not here, you have to squeeze into the subway to go to work and take outdoor scenes with your camera. This is the truest life you have ever lived. She got up and quickly brushed her teeth and washed her face. After making 2 sets of breakfast, she went to knock on Laro Khan's door. Although she was still angry, she was much more open-minded. Laro Khan could sleep with Pei Huan because Pei Huan wanted to, so there was no need to take it too seriously. When Laro Khan came out to open the door, he didn't expect it to be Pei Chichi, so he only wore pajama pants and was bare-chested. His thick xiong fur made Pei Chichi's eyes pop out. Of course, there were also scratches on his waist, as if a cat had scratched him. Laro Khan noticed her gaze and felt a little uncomfortable. He scratched his head and said, "Wait for me." He put on his clothes and went to have breakfast. Pei Chichi looked at him and asked, "Did Pei Huan or Sumo catch you?" Old Khan blushed and coughed lightly. Pei Huan isn't that wild. He's only meowing like a kitten. Only that fierce bitch, Sumo, would scratch him so fiercely as if she's never seen a man before. Pei Chichi was unhappy again. Very proud, aren't you? No, absolutely not. I was also muddle-headed at that time, wasn't I? Old Khan cared about his little disciple very much. Not to mention anything else, just living together for a while, his little disciple's cooking had conquered his stomach. Sumo's rejection was no longer as painful as before. Pei Chichi looked down and said softly after a while, "If you don't love Pei Huan, don't provoke her anymore." Old Khan was a good person, so it was not surprising that Pei Huan liked him. However, it was better to stay away from a man who had someone else in his heart. Seeing that she had finally relented, Old Khan was also relieved. He grunted and his eyes were filled with tears. The two of them reconciled, and Pei Chichi took Old Khan's car to the magazine office. Chapter 8:29. Xiao Pei, you will be in charge of Mr. Tang's Weibo in the future. It's very simple. You just need to interact with the fans and post some updates regularly. The editor-in-chief paused for a moment. I thought about it for a long time. To avoid trouble, I will use the name of the fan club. This way, it will be easier to play by the law. Pei Chichi really wanted to curse. Did the editor-in-chief play by the law too much last night? Tang Yu was a celebrity, but he wasn't a celebrity for sale. Why would he have a fan club? Moreover, was it easy to play by the law? If things went wrong, the entire magazine would be wiped out. Where did the editor-in-chief get his confidence from? The editor-in-chief saw her dissatisfaction and smiled. Of course, we won't use our magazine's name. We will open the account in our private name. This account is like our baby. We have to love it and take care of it. Xiao Pei, you are the one I trust the most. I will leave my child in your hands. When it came to shamelessness, Pei Chichi only admired the editor-in-chief. Even though she was cursing in her heart, Pei Chichi still took the slip of paper with the account password and went out. She logged into the account. Amy slid over and asked quietly, "How was the charity night last night?" "It's all in the newspapers, but I didn't see you." Pei Chichi answered Amy while busying herself. "I'm just a small character." Amy replied, "Oh." She slid back and said as if she was sleepwalking, "But I think the person in the painting looks like you." Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She remembered that the painting was in old Khan's hands. What happened after that? Just as she was thinking, the express delivery arrived. It was from Su Mo, and the item was the painting. Of course, Pei Chichi thought deeper. Su Mo was the one who slept with old Khan last night. She opened the painting and confirmed that it was the painting. Amy looked at it eagerly. "It's really you." Through this painting, she could imagine countless scenes of Pei Chichi and Tang Yu living together. Ex-husband and ex-wife. "Pei Chichi, did you and him?" Amy lowered her voice and looked around secretly. After making sure no one was around, she asked, "Did you do it in the kitchen?" Pei Chichi put the painting away and glanced at the gossipy Amy. "Yes," he said expressionlessly. Then she went to deal with the microblogging. Amy was stunned. She didn't expect Pei Chichi to admit it so easily. The kitchen was too exciting. On the other side, Pei Chichi was focused on dealing with the new fans. Looking at the hundreds of thousands of fans that had increased in just a few days, she was a little confused. Was this the effect of a celebrity? Or was it because of him? The number of fans was still increasing at an incredible speed. The number was constantly refreshing, and there were also many people who sent private messages asking about Tang Yu's latest situation, the fans Chu Shibei. And the fan Chu Chu's fans Xiong's fans fan. It was sent by a fan named Chu Shibei. The question was very simple. Who is your favorite? Pei Chichi was stunned for a moment, and then she privately replied, "Are you asking me or Mr. Tang?" The other side quickly replied, "You." Pei Chichi's heart skipped a beat. She stared at it for a long time but didn't reply. The person in front of her was just a stranger, but his question struck directly at her heart. It made her want to escape. After a long time, she typed on the keyboard again. "The person I love the most has left. He won't be coming back." Chapter 830. Pei Chichi stared at the three words Chu Shibei in a daze. After about half an hour, she thought that the person would not return, but the pop-up window popped up again. "The person I love has also left, but I am waiting for her. I believe that she will come back." Waiting for her? Then he was, "Are you a man?" Pei Chichi quickly typed over. The other side replied with a smiling emoji, which meant that he admitted it. Pei Chichi thought that the people who paid attention to this microblog should be little girls who loved to fantasize. How could there be a man here? She shook her head. She really wanted to blacklist him, but she couldn't make up her mind as she clicked on the mouse. At this time, the pop-up window popped up again, this time with a paragraph of text. "I believe that your him will also come back. He just has no way to do it now." Pei Chichi sat and stared at the text for a long time, so long that she didn't notice Amy coming over. Amy leaned over to take a look, then coughed softly and said in an experienced tone, "Pei Chichi, are you in an online relationship? Let me tell you, it's not reliable." Once you get on a date, you will find that the idol of your dreams is actually a poor loser. Pei Chichi tilted her head. Have you been cheated before? Amy's face darkened. Pei Chichi, you are so annoying. Pei Chichi thought that the 27-year-old Amy was quite cute. She imitated Amy and leaned over. Have you been cheated of your money and sex? Amy was a southerner, so her words were a little coy. At this time, Pei Chichi stepped on her thunder, so she exploded in a coy manner. Pei Chichi, you. What kind of truth are you saying? She said as she sat down again, her face red, and her voice was as low as possible. It's a secret. Who hasn't met a few scumbags before marriage? Pei Chichi smiled. When she turned around, another message popped up on the computer. Chu Shibei asked to add her as a friend and gave her a string of QQ numbers. Pei Chichi laughed. A little boy, who still used QQ to chat these days? However, she still added him. Sure enough, it was a little brother. Tang Yu also had a little brother, who claimed to be a 20-year-old newbie. Pei Chichi thought about how he said that the person he loved had left and that he was waiting. She laughed happily. Little wimp, always pretending to be deep and profound. The cute Chu Shibei suddenly said, I ordered flowers for you, 99 white roses. Do you like them? Pei Chichi was stunned. Why? Attached was a screenshot of her QQ profile. Her birthday was on it, and it happened to be today. Pei Chichi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was thinking like a little boy again. At this moment, she forgot that she was only 22 years old. I still think you should keep the money until your girlfriend comes back. Pei Chichi's fingers moved quickly. Then you can buy her a present to make her happy. First coax big sister, then coax my little fairy. The little boy's mouth was especially sweet. Pei Chichi was in a great mood. Were all the boys nowadays so interesting? She suddenly thought of Tang Xin. If Tang Xin was here, she would definitely like Chu Shibei very much. At this time, the editor-in-chief came out of the bathroom and saw Pei Chichi's fingers typing quickly on the keyboard. He smiled sweetly. What a good employee. Pei Chichi looked up and saw the editor-in-chief smile. She suddenly felt that this job was not bad. At least she could chat casually at work. Chapter 831. Pei Chichi sighed in her heart. In fact, she did not want anything to happen between her and Jinrong. In addition to the uneasiness of her identity, as she had said to Qin Anlan, she really did not want to have any feelings now. It was good to be alone. Before answering the phone, she said to Chu Shibei a friend was looking for her, so she answered the phone. A few words came quickly from the other side of the phone. Boyfriend. Pei Chichi picked up Lin Jinrong's phone and looked at the 3 words with a smile. Silly child, she had just said that she did not have a boyfriend. Because she was smiling, her voice was particularly light. Jinrong. Lin Jinrong was sitting in the president's office at the headquarters of Lin Group. His young face was very handsome. He was holding a mobile phone in one hand and a gold pen in the other, writing and drawing on the table. Pei Chichi, I heard that someone is having a birthday today. Is that true? Pei Chichi was a little surprised. She pursed her lips and did not know what to say. He would not just wish her a happy birthday, would he? Lin Jinrong waited for a while, but Pei Chichi did not say anything, so he directly said, let's have dinner together tonight. Pei Chichi, I just came back today and did not make it in time to dance with you yesterday. Is it okay to treat me to dinner today? Pei Chichi found it hard to refuse, so she agreed and made an appointment. After putting down the phone, she felt an indescribable stuffiness in her heart. She could face Qin Anlan's pressure with a cold face, but Jinrong was different. She pondered for a long time before she found a string of conversations on the computer screen, and it was sent by Chu Shibei. Are you still there? Do you have a date tonight? Pei Chichi smiled and her fingers fell on the keyboard, typing very slowly. There is one, someone I used to like asked me to dinner tonight. The other side was also silent for a long time before a line of words was sent. Do you still like him? Do I? Pei Chichi looked at the screen for a long time and smiled slightly. If he is willing, we can be good friends. This time, the other side's speed was obviously much faster. Yes, love can't be forced. Pei Chichi replied with 4 words, "You're still young but full of mischief. Give me the address. I'll send the roses over." A message was typed. In fact, Pei Chichi was still in a difficult position, but Chu Shibei sent another pitiful emoji. "Miss, you won't even give me this chance, right?" "All right." Pei Chichi gave him the address of the magazine and left his phone number. On the other side, Tang Yu looked at the name she left behind. Pei Xiaohua. She's really good at naming things. Tang Yu looked serious. He pressed the internal line and called Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran came in and looked at the CEO's serious face. "This address, send a bouquet of white roses, 99 of them." Tang Yu handed a note to Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran nodded. He was a little surprised. Was this for President Shen? But when he took the note, he was a little confused. Pei Xiaohua? Xiao Ran asked with some difficulty, "Is it Pei Chichi?" Tang Yu still looked serious. "Write it as Pei Xiaohua. And don't let anyone know that it's from me. Write it as Chu Shibei." Xiao Ran nodded, knowing that she was the only one who knew about this. She immediately went to do it. Although it was a little messy, her heart was as clear as a mirror. In the end, the CEO only had Pei Chichi in his heart, and no one else. Chapter 832. The card with Pei Xiaohua's name on it made Pei Chichi happy for the whole day. 99 white roses were placed on her desk. She leaned over and looked at the card. Pei Xiaohua, Chu Shibei. She giggled for a while before replying, "I've received the flowers, Xiao Beibei. We are best friends from now on." Tang Yu was in the middle of a meeting when his phone vibrated. He picked it up and looked at it. Then, a faint smile appeared on his face. Everyone in Shengyuan High School was shocked. It had been a long time since they saw the CEO smile so gently. It seemed like it had been more than a year. Tang Yu looked at it for a while before sending an emoticon. After that, she did not send it, and neither did he. After the meeting, he asked Xiao Ran to stay behind and said calmly, "Go and find out where Mr. Lin ordered dinner tonight." Xiao Ran was a smart person. He immediately realized that it must have something to do with Pei Chichi. He went back to his office and used his connections to find out where it was. Mr. Lin ordered a Michelin restaurant dinner tonight. He even ordered a 3-tiered cake. And 99 red roses. Xiao Ran did not dare to say it out loud. She knew very well who the candlelight dinner and the rose cake were for. She wondered if there was a proposal ring. Sure enough, the CEO's expression did not look good. Xiao Ran left the office. She closed the door and smiled. This vinegar bucket was probably going to be overturned. Tang Yu picked up his phone and found Pei Xiaohua on QQ. He sent a message to her. "Miss, I'll chat with you tonight. I'll sing a birthday song for you, okay?" Mr. Tang was really good when he acted cute. Pei Xiaohua replied, "Stop fooling around. Be good." Although it was only a few words, his anxious heart was strangely soothed. No matter what, Pei Chichi only had him in her heart. After work, Pei Chichi went back to the apartment with Larokan. Larokan looked a little listless today. He lay on the sofa and did not move. Although Pei Chichi was still a little angry, she couldn't bear to see him like this. She took his temperature. She poked his forehead with her slender fingers. "You still think you're in your 20s? Too much." She was full of disdain, but she still cooked 2 dishes and a soup for him. Old Khan ate to his satisfaction. "I don't want anyone. Just a little disciple will do." Old Khan looked at Pei Xiaoqi earnestly and said. Pei Chichi glared at him. "Bah. I'll only believe you if you say that again in 2 years. After a while, she remembered something and looked at Larokan. "Sumo isn't someone you can control. Larokan, find yourself a woman you like and marry." Larokan was in a daze for a while before he smiled and looked at Pei Chichi. "What about you? Will you find someone you like to marry? For example, the kid who treated you to dinner tonight?" Pei Chichi couldn't answer Larokan. Old Khan was silent as well. After a while, he wiped his face and said, "Let's not talk about this anymore." Let's just live like this. After the incident, Pei Chichi's mood was still a little gloomy when she arrived at the Michelin Hotel. She was sad for Laro Khan. Lin Jinrong had already arrived. He was standing at the entrance of the hotel in a black suit. He was handsome and elegant. This was how Pei Chichi imagined Lin Jinrong to look like when she was in school. But now that she saw him, she was no longer moved. Chapter 833. Just then, a waiter appeared, holding a bouquet of red roses. Lin Jinrong held it in one hand and walked down the stairs to her side. This was the second bouquet she had received today, and it was a red rose that symbolized love. She was a little hesitant. Don't think too much. Lin Jinrong put the bouquet in her arms, still smiling. It's just a meal. Pei Chichi smiled, feeling a little uncomfortable. Lin Jinrong booked a table with a beautiful view. It was next to the window, and they could see the entire night view of B City. After sitting down, Pei Chichi rested her chin on her hand and looked out of the window. Tonight, she wore a long black t-shirt and a white camisole. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail, and she looked thin and small, giving off a refreshing vibe. She clearly didn't put on any makeup, but her facial features were beautiful, and there wasn't a single part of her that wasn't beautiful. She looked out of the window, and Lin Jinrong looked back at her. His eyes were gentle, just like the day they first met. The waiter served the dishes softly and delicately. Finally, a 3-layer cake was served. On the top, there was a Barbie doll taking a bath, and the bubbles around it were especially dreamy. No matter how complicated Pei Chichi felt, she was still a little surprised. This was her first birthday in a real sense. She had only been with Tang Yu in the past, and she had never told him about her birthday. The cake can be eaten later. Lin Jinrong gestured for her to eat first, and then served her naturally. Pei Chichi realized that Lin Jinrong's gestures were very similar to Tang Yu's, and his face was also somewhat similar. She was a little dazed for a moment. Lin Jinrong realized that she was distracted and paused. Chichi. She then came back to her senses and smiled apologetically. I'm sorry. Lin Jinrong smiled. It's okay. Can you share what you were thinking about just now? There was a hint of prying in his tone. Pei Chichi looked at him for a long time, unable to speak. Then, Lin Jinrong knew that she was thinking about Tang Yu. The atmosphere was a little subtle. Tang Yu was an obstacle in her heart that she couldn't overcome, but at the same time, he was also in her heart. Just when the atmosphere was a little awkward, a soft child's voice came from next door, sister. Pei Chichi's body trembled, and so did Lin Jinrong. He turned his head to the side, and his mind was in a mess. Sitting at the next table were Tang Yu and Lin Yun. Of course, they had a pretty little girl with them. Be careful. She was chewing on her little finger, but her eyes were fixed on a certain part of Pei Chichi's body. Pei Chichi's heart tightened, and she resisted the urge to cover her clothes. Tang Yu's gaze fell on Lin Jinrong and Pei Chichi's faces. His gaze then fell on the cake and red roses on the table. He said faintly, Jinrong, I remember your birthday is in spring. It's Chichi's birthday. Lin Jinrong smiled and ignored the uncomfortable situation. He walked over and greeted Lin Yun, Auntie. Pei Chichi wanted to dig a hole in the ground. Although she didn't want to develop anything with Jinrong, her ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law were there. It was true that she and Jinrong would sit together for a candlelit dinner. Moreover, they were relatives. Tang Yu's gaze was locked on her. Only Lin Jinrong walked over calmly and hugged Xiaoshan. Xiaoshan, do you miss your brother? Tang Yu held his forehead, feeling a headache. Lin Yun glanced at her son and sighed softly. Their relationship was a mess. Chapter 834. Pei Chichi was in a difficult position. The little guy's cries were quite pitiful. But it was too uncomfortable. She didn't dare to go over and look at Tang Yu, her legs were still weak from the kiss last night. Lin Yun was also in a difficult position. One was her son, and the other was her nephew. Although her son had divorced her, her son was still thinking about her. Lin Yun's attitude was vague. She didn't want to lose her composure as an elder in front of Jinrong. Lin Jinrong was well aware of it, but he pretended not to know. He played with Xiaoxin for a while. She was more like a brother than Tang Yu. Xiaoxin wanted Pei Chichi to hug her. Lin Jinrong put the little baby in Pei Chichi's arms and smiled. "Hug me for a while." Pei Chichi hugged her and was a little worried that she would do the same thing she did that day. However, she didn't have any misgivings and obediently lay in her arms. She stared at Pei Chichi with her big, tender eyes and licked her little lips. She looked especially cute and adorable. Pei Chichi couldn't help but kiss her. Lin Yun looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu's expression softened a lot. Maybe this was what he had been looking for all his life. Xiaoxin's whole body was soft. She sat on Pei Chichi's lap and wanted to eat. "Happy birthday, little sister." Pei Chichi sat with Xiaoxin on her lap. Lin Jinrong bent down and leaned close to them. They looked like a family of three. "That hurts, Tang Yu." At this moment, a waiter passed by. Lin Jinrong was about to get up. Although the waiter stepped back in time and didn't hit him, the soup in his hand spilled straight toward Xiaoxin in Pei Chichi's arms. In the nick of time, a large palm blocked Xiaoxin's face, and the bowl of hot soup fell straight towards that large palm. Pei Chichi's heart almost stopped beating. With a muffled groan, the back of Tang Yu's hand was red. The soup flowed down from the back of his hand. The waiter quickly put down the things in his hand and wiped Tang Yu's fingers with a tissue. When he saw Tang Yu's face, he was even more shocked. "Mr. Tang, I'm sorry." Tang Yu didn't make things difficult for him. He just said indifferently, "Clean up." The waiter finished quickly. Everything calmed down and the atmosphere became strange again. Lin Yun said gently, "It's Chichi's birthday. Let's celebrate together." Pei Chichi couldn't refuse an elder, so she finally agreed in a low voice. Once again, they sat together. There were 4 seats, so their little hearts were glued to Pei Chichi. At this moment, the manager of the previous incident was alerted. He came over to apologize and especially asked if Tang Yu's hand was injured. Tang Yu said indifferently that it was fine. He and Pei Chichi were sitting in the same direction. The manager looked at him, then at Pei Chichi, and the child in her hands. He smiled and said, "Mr. Tang, this is your child, right? He looks just like you. She also looks like Mrs. Tang." These words made people feel quite uncomfortable. Pei Chichi thought that Tang Yu or Lin Yun would explain, but they didn't. Since no one said anything, it was even more subtle. She coughed lightly and was about to say something when Tang Yu interrupted her. "Bring the dishes we ordered here too." The manager said yes repeatedly and served them personally. Lin Yun looked at Pei Chichi, who was holding Xin awkwardly. She smiled and said, "Let me hold her." Chapter 835. Cake. "I want to eat cake." Xiaoxin pointed at the pretty doll on the cake and licked her lips. Pei Chichi was about to eat when Lin Jinrong smiled, "You can eat after the meal. Children eat sweets first and then refuse to eat later. You seem to know a lot." Pei Chichi spoke unnaturally. Lin Jinrong looked into her eyes and said slowly, "Sometimes when Aunt comes back, she will take care of Xiaoxin." Pei Chichi responded with an "oh" and then didn't know what to say. The 4 adults present did not make a sound, only little Xiaoxin was eating her heart-shaped lamb chop. It was especially fragrant and sweet, it smelled so good. Pei Chichi looked at Xiaoxin's little face and couldn't help but think of the restaurant manager's words. Looking closely, Xiaoxin did look more like Tang Yu and also somewhat like herself. Perhaps it was because Tang Yu and she were related by blood, so she had this illusion? But she still felt that it was a little strange. At this moment, Lin Jinrong said calmly, "Chichi, I have something to say to you later." Tonight's arrangement was probably ruined. He couldn't propose to her in front of so many people, let alone in front of Tang Yu. As for Tang Yu's appearance at this time, Lin Jinrong didn't think it was purely a coincidence. However, he didn't say it out loud. Some things would be bad if he said it out loud. If he said it out loud, he might not even have the slightest chance. Pei Chichi looked at him and forgot to react for a moment. Suddenly, her hand under the table was caught by someone. A warm big palm caught her little hand. It wasn't a tight grip, but she couldn't break free easily. It was Tang Yu. She struggled a little, but he held her even tighter. At this moment, the strength of a man and a woman was so distinct. Pei Chichi didn't dare to look at him, nor did she dare to look at Lin Jinrong and Lin Yun, who were opposite her, for fear that they would see through her. It wasn't that she didn't want to struggle, but if she struggled, it wouldn't be good for anyone. Fortunately, he was holding her left hand, so she could still eat. Pei Chichi didn't do anything else, she just kept eating. Xiaoxin's chubby little face looked at her and exclaimed, "This older sister can eat so much." Pei Chichi's hand paused. Then, she wanted to dig a hole again. She raised her eyes to look at Xiaoxin. It was probably because of her fierce gaze that Xiaoxin's big eyes started to tear up. Then, she started to cry. Pei Chichi was at a loss. She looked at Xiaoxin, then at Lin Yun. She wanted to comfort Xiaoxin, but her hand was held by Tang Yu. The hand tightened on her small one for a moment, then let go. Tang Yu got up and hugged Xiaoxin. He patted her back and coaxed her gently. As the baby was being coaxed, it stared at Pei Chichi with its big black eyes. There was a hint of arrogance in its eyes. "Hurry up and coax me." Pei Chichi didn't know how to coax a baby, so she just looked at him. Tang Yu glanced at her with a reproachful look. Pei Chichi was confused. "What does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with me? What does it have to do with me? You're the one holding my hand. Otherwise, I would be the one holding the baby now." She didn't say anything. She looked at Tang Yu holding Xiaoxin with a practiced posture, as if he was born to be a father. For a moment, she thought of the child she lost. Her pupils shrank, and her fingers unconsciously placed on her lower abdomen. Chapter 836. As Pei Chichi was in a trance, her hand sank and Xiaoxin was already in her hand. The chubby little person looked at her stubbornly. "Coax me." Pei Chichi felt that the little person's eyes were very familiar, as if she had seen them before, but she couldn't remember. At this time, Lin Jinrong's cell phone rang. It was Wang Ziki. He looked at it, smiled apologetically at Pei Chichi, and walked to the side to answer the phone. As soon as he left, Xiaoxin's little body twisted, and her face was as serious as a doll. "I'm hungry." Pei Chichi pinched her little face. "You're the one who ate a lot." Xiaoxin's dark and delicate eyes stared straight at the cake. She really wanted to eat it. Pei Chichi's eyes also moved over. "Want to eat it?" Xiaoxin nodded reservedly, and looked straight at her again. Pei Chichi smiled and pinched her little face, although the little fellow was quite resistant. She sat down with Xiaoxin in her arms, took down the little doll, and asked the waiter to wash it before giving it to Xiaoxin. Then, she carefully cut a small piece of cake for Xiaoxin. Although Xiaoxin was only 1 year old, actually more than a week old, she could already firmly hold the small spoon and eat the delicious cake. The little person was originally fragrant and soft, but now it was even more fragrant and soft. Embedded in Pei Chichi's arms, it seemed to fill the hole in her heart. At that moment, she suddenly had an absurd thought: how good it would be if Xiaoxin was her child. So healthy, so lively and cute. She looked at the little person's mouth moving, and her eyes couldn't help but soften. She reached out and stroked Xiaoxin's straight black hair. This child's hair was really good, and her little face was also delicate, like a smaller version of Tang Yu. Tang Yu looked at her with gentle eyes. When Lin Jinrong turned around after answering the phone, he first saw Tang Yu's gaze. He was startled for a moment, and then his expression changed. He quickly walked over and looked at the small piece of cake. Of course, there was also little Xiaoxin, who had a satisfied look on her face as she ate. Her chubby little hands held onto a small spoon, and she looked just like an excavator as she dug and ate without chewing. Lin Jinrong's heart tightened. He took the cake and flipped it up and down, inside and out. "No." His face turned pale, and he looked at Xiaoxin seriously. "Did you eat something just now?" Xiaoxin's chubby little hand was holding a small spoon. She was frightened by his appearance. Her delicate little face looked as if she was about to cry but wasn't about to. Lin Jinrong's face turned even paler. Tang Yu also realized what had happened. He stood up and guessed what had happened. Fresh flowers, cake, and a diamond ring. Jinrong had wanted to propose tonight. But now, the ring might have been eaten by his little heart. Tang Yu pursed his lips and called the cake maker over. His expression was stern. "Are you sure you've put the ring in?" The cake maker was on the verge of breaking down. He gritted his teeth and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Tang." Tang Yu's gaze fell on Xiaoxin's little face. Xiaoxin probably saw the change in his expression, and she was so scared that she finally peed her pants. She wailed loudly. Pei Chichi was also stunned. "How could there be a ring? I put it in." Lin Jinrong's voice was restrained. "Xiaoxin might have eaten it." Chapter 837. Tang Yu took 2 steps, paused, and stretched out his long hand. He held Xiaoxin in one hand and grabbed Pei Chichi's hand with the other. He held her hand right in front of Jinrong. "Come with me to the hospital." Pei Chichi didn't have a chance to think, and secondly, she couldn't refuse. She was the one who gave Xiaoxin the cake. She quickly caught up with him and left with Tang Yu, one after the other. At this moment, she forgot that Jinrong was behind them, and that the ring was the one he used to propose to her. Lin Yun didn't follow them, and Lin Jinrong also stood there. Everything was quiet, and the surrounding noise didn't seem to affect this place. Lin Jinrong placed his hands on both sides of the dining table, looked up, and quietly looked at his aunt. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Aunt, whose child is Xiaoxin?" He could still remember that scene even when he closed his eyes. Tang Yu and Pei Chichi sat together, Xiaoxin between them, and the 3 faces looked strangely harmonious. Even the manager said that they were a family. Lin Yun smiled. "Of course she's my child." Lin Jinrong's face had a touch of bitterness. "Really?" Lin Yun could only sigh softly. Actually, tonight was a hint. If Jinrong was smart, he shouldn't fall for it anymore. Nothing would happen between him and Pei Chichi. Tang Yu quickly walked to his car with Xiaoxin in his arms, opened the back door, and handed Xiaoxin to Pei Chichi. "Sit in the back and hold her vertically. Call me if there's a problem." Pei Chichi pursed her lips and nodded. Before he closed the car door, Xiaoxin's big watery eyes kept staring at him out of fear, and so did Pei Chichi. His heart warmed, and he couldn't help but reach out to pinch Xiaoxin's soft little face, and then touched Pei Chichi's. His voice was extremely hoarse. "It's okay." Although he said that, he drove very fast, and the black sports car penetrated through the city's reinforced concrete, speeding through the neon lights. Although he was anxious, his heart was warm. His wife and son were sitting in the back of his car. What he had always longed for, what he had dreamt of enchanting. The word enchanting was a typo. I forgot how to write it. Soon, the car stopped in front of the outpatient department of Shengyuan Hospital. On the way there, he contacted an expert in the digestive system. When his car arrived, so did the expert. Xiaoxin probably knew what she had eaten and refused to get out of the car with tears in her eyes. Tang Yu carefully took her out of Pei Chichi's arms and reached out to wipe away the tears of the fat little thing. He said in a low voice, "Baby, you have to be careful when you eat in the future, okay?" Little Xiaoxin nodded obediently, her little body snuggling into Tang Yu's embrace, her little hands hugging his neck, her face buried in his warm neck. Pei Chichi was a little envious as she watched. Their relationship was really good. Tang Yu carefully walked into the medical building, and she hurriedly followed. The chief specialist examined him very carefully and asked if he had any stomachache. Little Xiaoxin whispered. The baby ate the cake and felt very comfortable. Tang Yu and Pei Chichi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The doctor smiled and looked up. It shouldn't be a big problem. As long as it doesn't get stuck in the respiratory tract and enters the stomach, the ring shouldn't be too big, and it should be discharged tomorrow. Chapter 838. The doctor coughed lightly. It shouldn't be difficult to expel it. Oh right, get a basin and check tomorrow. You can only rest assured if it's discharged. Tang Yu nodded and went out. The nurse led him to a separate suite on the 5th floor. It wasn't the usual white of the hospital. Instead, it had pink walls and a pink princess bed. Everything was pink, just like a child's room at home. Pei Chichi was a little surprised. Tang Yu went over and put Xiaoshan on the bed. He calmly explained the doubts in her heart. She was not in good health since she was born, and she has severe rhinitis. It will flare up in spring, so we arranged a separate room for her in the hospital. Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She sat on Xiaoshan's bed and looked at the chubby little guy. She asked softly, "Does your stomach hurt?" Xiaoshan shook her head and then yawned, "I'm so sleepy." The chubby little guy crawled over skillfully and snuggled on her body. His intention was very obvious. Tang Yu took a deep look at Pei Chichi and took a pack of cigarettes out, coax her to sleep. Pei Chichi was a little confused. "This is your sister, why didn't you coax her?" But Tang Yu had already walked out. Pei Chichi looked down at the little guy lying on her body and snuggled anxiously. She closed her eyes and followed the little guy. After a while, the chubby little hand quietly unbuttoned her blouse and then burrowed into her arms. His fluffy little head arched against hers. Pei Chichi closed her eyes. It was just a child. It was nothing. She was also a little girl. Perhaps it was because she had eaten too much before, and after tossing and turning for a while, Xiaoshan fell asleep after sucking twice. Her chubby little hand held onto Pei Chichi's and her whole body snuggled into Pei Chichi's arms. Her breath was also on Pei Chichi's neck. It was as warm as a hot water bottle. Pei Chichi waited for her breathing to stabilize before getting up. She put the little girl down and looked at her again. The more she looked at her, the more she felt that Lin Yun looked good. Her facial features resembled Tang Yu's. It seemed that Lin Yun's genes were too strong. After looking for a while, she gathered her clothes and went to the bathroom to tidy up. She turned on the tap and splashed cold water on her face. She felt that her face was a little hot. She needed cold water to cool down, although she did not know why she felt hot. There was also a kind of uneasiness hidden in her heart that had broken out of the cocoon, but she couldn't find the reason. The bathroom door was pulled open silently. Then, a person appeared in the mirror. He hugged her from behind. Jun Yang rested on her shoulder. His gaze was deep, meeting hers in the mirror. "Is Mr. Tang blinking again? If it is, I think your fiancé will be very happy to accept." She did not retreat and looked at him, forgetting that her clothes were disheveled. His large hands grasped her waist and slowly moved downwards. His voice was neither fast nor slow. "I've always had those thoughts about her." He lowered his head and nibbled on her fair shoulder. At the same time, her t-shirt slid down her shoulders and piled on her waist. Because of the cold, she arched her delicate body and curled up. He took the opportunity to move forward, and her body was pressed tightly in front of the mirror. The front was cold, and the back was his hot male body. One hot and one cold, and it was like a torment in her heart. Chapter 839. She tried her best to keep her voice steady so that he wouldn't notice anything wrong with her. At this moment, she regretted it. She was like a lamb walking into a tiger's den. Tang Yu's face was close to hers, and his voice was as deep as the night. "What about you? Pei Chichi, do you have feelings for your brother now?" His large palm was teasing her. Pei Chichi froze, and her body struggled violently. She said with a suppressed voice, "Tang Yu, do you have any shame?" She gasped and closed her eyes tightly, unable to believe what he was doing to her. She was his sister. "Chichi, you have feelings." As he was doing such a shameful thing to her, he pinched her little chin and forced her to look at herself in the mirror. "Do you see? Even if you are my brother, you still have a reaction under my palm." Pei Chichi closed her eyes slightly, unwilling to look at the woman in the mirror. She was unwilling to admit that the woman whose face was flushed red and whose eyes were brimming with tears was herself. She didn't care if he was her brother or not. It was because she hated him, but she couldn't resist his teasing. She hated herself. She closed her eyes and shook her head desperately. "Let go of me, Tang Yu. I am your sister. I don't care." He continued to torture her, and his dark eyes were locked on her in the mirror. His body was extremely tense. He had endured for a long time, and at this moment, he was in unbearable pain. Pei Chichi was held in his arms, and her body was as soft as water. He knew all her weaknesses. Her eyes opened slightly, and she looked at the man in the mirror. Don't care. Pei Chichi's face gradually became cold, like a cold fragrance in winter. Tang Yu, do you dare to want me? Her voice was soft. While Tang Yu was in a daze, she had already turned around, and her little hand was on his shoulder. She looked up at his depressed face. His Adam's apple kept moving, and his body instantly tensed under her fingertips. Pei Chichi tiptoed, and her little mouth reached his neck, kissing his Adam's apple. Her voice was especially hoarse. Do you dare to take your sister? Tang Yu narrowed his eyes as he held onto her waist, almost breaking her in half. His breathing became hotter and hotter, as if he was breathing fire. If you feel guilty, then don't pester me. She bit his neck mischievously, just like in the past. However, Tang Yu clearly felt that she was different. His Chichi had been corrupted by old Khan. When had she ever been such a shy and charming little thing? When had she ever been so bold? Tang Yu was in a dilemma. Should he take her or let her go? His large hand held hers tightly, and her eyes were filled with provocation, dazzling to the point of dazzling. Covering her eyes with one hand, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. At the same time, he carried her to the sink. He kissed her greedily, holding her little face so that she could not escape. The kiss became deeper and deeper. This kiss was filled with his dominance and her despair. It was so deep, so deep. Her body was pressed against the hard mirror behind her. Her clothes were disheveled, and she looked very unbearable. Suddenly, she pushed him away forcefully. Her breathing was messy, and her little mouth was slightly swollen from the kiss. Her eyes were watery, and she looked the most beautiful and seductive. Her little hand moved to the back. Tang Yu was stunned. He did not expect her to do this. Chapter 840. She even kicked off her skirt and just sat there like that. Compared to before, she was thinner, but some parts seemed to be fuller. Tang Yu's Adam's apple kept rolling sexily. He really wanted to press her down and have sex with her, but what did she call him? She called him brother. The nickname in the past was so ironic and unsurpassable at this moment. The veins on his forehead were bulging, and his voice was tense. Put on your clothes. Pei Chichi was unmoved and continued to sneer. Tang Yu, will it be all right if I put on my clothes? Will you stop pestering me then? Pestering. She used the word pestering. There was a hint of bitterness at the corner of his mouth, and his body also retreated a little dispiritedly. Slowly, he said with difficulty, Chichi, wait for me for 2 years. He was already doing what he had to do. He really couldn't take the risk, so he would rather not give her hope for the time being. Perhaps, he was wrong. He really shouldn't pester her like this and make her feel troubled. But he was so afraid that she would be together with Jinrong, Qin Anlan, and maybe more in the future. His little one was so beautiful, how could he not worry? But now, in her heart, he was already a shameless man. On the one hand, he was engaged to Shen Lian, and on the other hand, he was pestering her. His fingers wanted to touch her. When he touched her cheek, Pei Chichi waved his hand away. Her body was pressed against the glass behind her, and her eyes were filled with despair as she looked at him. Don't touch me. She laughed softly, and tears flowed down her cheeks. Tang Yu, you're the one who gave up. You're the one who didn't want me or our child. Her hand was flat against his chest, and she looked a little absent-minded. Do you know what it means to have a dead heart and to live without seeing the sun? Her eyes were as sad as the day she found out about her identity. I thought that I had lost everything, but I still had you. You said, Pei Chichi, you still had me, but in the end, I had nothing. Her voice was very soft, very slow. I don't have any family, I don't have a child, my husband has become my brother, someone else's fiancé. Now you want me to wait for you? Tang Yu, what should I wait for you? When you abort the child in my belly one more time? The last few words were uttered in a heartbreaking manner. Her face and eyes were filled with tears. She seemed to have gone mad. Why did you appear in front of me? Why did you tear open my wound? It wasn't easy for me to forget. Tears blurred her vision and made her look miserable, but she didn't care. If you pester me again and kiss me again, I will immediately agree to Jinrong's proposal. She looked at him and said word by word, not avoiding his gaze at all. Tang Yu's body stiffened. He looked at her little face and pursed his thin lips. Believe me, I'll do it. She looked fearlessly into his eyes, stubbornly meeting his gaze. The wound was torn open right after they kissed. He closed his eyes and softly spat out a few words. It doesn't hurt, so I don't love anymore. Chichi, right? She couldn't understand what he meant, and she didn't want to understand. At this moment, she just wanted to escape from his side, because she couldn't bear to be hurt again. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.